whatever belongings they could grab. They weren't sure what to expect once inside, but the general belief is it's safer than their own home. There's air conditioning, water, and food. Also, the National Guard and Florida Highway Patrol are here to keep it secure.
Are you worried at all about the conditions inside?
Oh, no. I'm a camper from way back. I can do just fine.
This couple just moved to Florida from Seattle 2 months ago.
Do you feel like you waited too long to decide?
Yeah, totally. I wanted to leave on Monday.
Yeah, my fault.
It's like if it's the biggest hurricane ever, just leave and then you're not stuck.
The line goes on and on and on. Really, as far as the eye can see, some of these people have been waiting in this line for 4, 5, 6 hours. It first opened at 10 a.m. this morning, and many of them told me that the reason they came here was they saw the way that storm shifted and that track shifted, and they said they've got to get out of their homes. Were you planning to evacuate, or was this a last-minute decision?
Yeah, it was definitely a last-minute decision. Yeah, I'm in Zone B, so then when the evacuation, I was just on the edge of the mandatory evacuation, and I decided I should come anyways because I'd rather be safe.
I've been here 30 years, and I've ridden out other hurricanes, so yes. But when they increased the boundary for the mandatory evacuation, then we had to leave.
This was all especially tough for the elderly and disabled. Some sat down while others held their place in line.
And so we migrate up ahead, wait. They catch up, we migrate ahead, and they catch up. So a lot of teamwork.
Yeah, you're making friends with some good Samaritans, it sounds like.
Yeah. It's been rough, though.
Okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
And Randy, I mean, thank goodness the weather outside there was all right. I mean, I know it rained a little bit, but it was, had that been torrential rain with strong winds, it would have been exponentially more miserable for people waiting outside there because they had to wait for hours and hours.
Absolutely. That would have made it a lot worse. And we spoke with one of the Florida Highway Patrol lieutenants, Lieutenant Greg Bueno, and he told us that they were trying to hustle people in as quickly as they could because they were worried about the weather. By the time we were there this afternoon, mid-afternoon, they had about 1,000 people inside already, but they said they did have room for 8,000, so that was really good news for all of those people waiting in line. He also said there would be security in there, the Highway Patrol would be in there, the National Guard would be in there, there is air conditioning, food, clean water. He was hoping that this would be a good experience for everyone, and as you saw, I understand what I really was pleased to see was that there were so many good Samaritans in that line who were holding spots for the elderly, holding spots for those who were disabled to try and help them get through this experience. So it was just really nice to see that there wasn't really any tension, just everybody working together to get through Irma.
Yeah, and obviously, look, a lot of people obviously have cars here, but there's a lot of people who don't have cars, don't have access to easy transportation, or don't have friends who have vehicles who can drop them off there. And, they've had to rely on shuttle buses by the local government here. Those stopped today at 3 o'clock. So even tomorrow morning, though there may be time for them and space in that shelter or in others, the opportunity for them to actually get there can be very difficult. I talked to law enforcement about that earlier. So they said, look, you can call 211, which is the emergency number, to request transportation to some of these shelters. But again, that line was very busy today. The mayor himself told me he tried to call it 5 times just to check on it. Wasn't able to get through any of those times. I encourage people to keep trying. But again, as resources are limited and as law enforcement and first responders need to try to do other things as well in advance of this storm, helping people get to that shelter may be a little bit lower down on the list. So it's going to be a difficult decision tomorrow for those who wake up scared and realizing, you know what, I really need to try to get to a shelter. We're going to take a short break, and our coverage continues.
5 to 10 feet south of Miami through Key West. 10 to 15 feet from Naples down towards Key Largo, even Tampa looking at 5 to 8 feet of storm surge. And then we started to see even some of that creep into portions of Georgia and South Carolina with 4 to 6 feet of storm surge. Winds also going to be a huge factor. Take a look at some of these numbers. For maximum wind gusts, 134 miles per hour in Fort Myers, 135 in Key West. Even Orlando, which is pretty far inland, looking at nearly 75 miles per hour for those peak wind gusts and rainfall, guys. Anderson, this is also going to be the key thing to note. Storm surge is huge, but you also have to keep in mind, as that water comes inland, you also have the water coming down as well. And we could be looking at widespread 6 to 10 inches of rain, and then some heavier pockets that could be 15 plus inches on top of the storm surge that comes in. So again, the main thing, folks, when it starts to come in, don't get out on the roads. Don't get in that water, because the storm surge alone is enough to trap your car, let alone any flash flooding that could incur as well at the same time.
Yeah, so many things to think about depending on where you want to get to. Allison, appreciate it.
Key West. This is one of few that we've had today. There will be many. In fact, it's not unusual to have 50, 60, 70, 75, 80 tornado warnings. I know Harvey had over 200. But again, tornadoes are going to be an issue. And I know for many, when they're looking at, of course, Irma making its way toward southwestern Florida, Miami, Hollywood, Boca, Delray Beach may think, okay, we're not going to see the strongest winds, but you're in an area where you could have a higher concentration of tornadoes. Now, again, as we continue to watch this, Anderson, make its way off the coast, I'm going to show you a radar in a minute. Very interesting now to continue to watch the eye. We're already seeing on the infrared satellite imagery more purple. That's the higher cloud tops, colder cloud tops. So it's starting to generate some energy. But I think we may be going through one of those eye wall replacement cycles. More than when almost the entire state of Florida under a hurricane warning. Watches to the north will change in due time as the storm progresses northward. We've talked tirelessly about the storm surge, of course, getting quite great. Now, you have to understand where you see the area of purple of 10 to 15 feet. Initially, that's wetlands. That's Everglades. There's barely any roads there until you get up to around Alligator Alley. But it does extend all the way through the Carolinas, and that will continue to be the case. Now, here's the eye. We've got a secondary banding in yellow that is starting to occur. We typically see that when that outer band starts to form, and then it shrinks in toward the center, and it gains strength. It's a little close to the shoreline right now, but I think that's going to happen. Now, consider this. We've talked tirelessly about as well. We've got 90 miles here from Cuba to the coast of Florida to develop. This is going to be more than 90 miles. You have to consider the curvature and its western track and then to the north. So instead of 90 miles of extremely warm water, we've got 120, 125 miles. So that will intensify over time with this water temperatures being at 85 or 90. Tornado watch now for the extreme southern half of Florida. We're going to talk more in depth about that as time progresses and what to expect past Florida. There are millions of people up in Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, and Tennessee that have got an interesting forecast, too, and we'll share that with them, Anderson, in just a little bit.
Tom.
Yeah, John, we continue to watch the storm center now, making its way away from the coast of Cuba. We knew it would make its way here, and all week long, since actually last weekend, we were saying until the storm reaches Cuba and turns northward, we just do not know for sure where landfall will be. The computer models, we pushed into them and rely on them, and they have been fluctuating earlier this week to the east and now more of a push to the west. And we're going to continue to watch that because the steering currents mean everything, but this is such a monster storm, it really doesn't mean anybody's going to miss out on this. So we are watching the development. The pressure is dropping. Most likely we're going to see an increase in the winds because it takes a while for the winds to catch up to that pressure drop. In fact, 125 miles per hour, I wouldn't be surprised to see it up to 130. That'll kick it back up to Category 4 status, and we could even see it grow a little bit more. We've got a lot of land or water to work with. It's not just 90 miles. If you talk about the curvature over toward Fort Myers, that's about 125 miles. So it's got time, it's got fuel, and it still has its spin and intensity. We had a few models that wanted to drape it down into the higher terrain of Cuba. That would have tore the system down a little bit. But really, for the models to be even in central Cuba or staying off, it's been running pretty much mediocre right through these models. We have a tornado watch now for the entire southern half of Florida. That will continue to move northward in time. As the storm approaches, we've had a few warnings. We've got a warning right now in Key West for a tornado. So that means it's either Doppler indicated or visually indicated. So again, on the ground, as the bands continue to move in, the wind gusts will increase. There will be times of a complete downpour activity and then a couple of quiet times. But we are going to see a gentle increase in the winds. The forecast, which shows the spin and the rainfall, bright red are your heavy downpours. And again, our storm surge is going to be significant significant, mainly first in the Everglades. Of course, Miami, we're watching them closely, but the real insignificant increase of the storm surge in the Everglades. And that's good news. It's wetlands. They can have that. But as it continues to march northward, we'll see more of a tornado outbreak possibility on the East Coast. We'll have the surge, of course, continuing up the East Coast. On the West Coast, winds will be out of the north somewhat, northeasterly. They will wrap around. I think Tampa is going to have a problem. Not so much, of course, well, yes, when the storm moves through. But don't let your guard down in Tampa Bay, because most likely on the back edge of this, we're going to find winds coming in from the northwest and due west. So that'll shove the, of course, storm surge and those walls of water back into Tampa Bay, which could be just as bad, if not worse. I want to go a little bit further out, though, and talk about those in Georgia, South Carolina, into Alabama and Tennessee. As you see, the track has been curving, and we've been watching this. Let me show you what some of the models look like, of course, after we talk about the winds, because I want everybody to know, if you haven't been in the southeast, you see the core of the winds move up through Florida, hugging that west coast, moving northward. What you see in purple here are wind gusts in excess of 60, maybe even 70 miles per hour. This area of the southeastern U.S. is pine country, which means hardy pines. Weak root systems, but very high. I mean, they're massive. They fall in isolated thunderstorms, knock out power, damage trees. We could easily see tens and tens of thousands of trees destroyed through Florida and through the southeast. But now, John, watch what happens to these models. They move up with the force of wind. We carry it into into northern Alabama. I'll show it to you later. It starts to become a bird's nest like we had with Harvey, which means there may be a loss of steering currents when it gets from central Tennessee to northern Alabama, and that means heavy, heavy rainfall. We'll break that down for you more, of course, in the coming hours. But again, it's just beginning. We've got a multi-day event heading our direction. John.
You know, Tom Sater, listening to every word of your forecast. 20 million people in Florida alone, and then you start to talk about Alabama and Georgia. Millions more will be affected by this storm as these days continue. Millions already affected. So many hurt, so much damage through the Caribbean. That is why we're watching this storm so closely.
Well, I'll tell you what, John, I know everybody wants to know exactly what time landfall is and exactly where. All week long, we have been trying to get the word out. Until Irma makes a turn to the north, we can't do that. I thought by now the system would have made the right turn. Sure, there's a northerly component, but it's west-northwest. I mean, if this continues on a west-northwest track, we may barely get a landfall in Key West. Now, at some point, it will turn northward. And notice the color of red on an infrared satellite imagery, higher, colder cloud tops. Notice how it broadens off that coast. This is getting stronger. This was the first Category 5 to make landfall in Cuba since 1924. That should tell you how massive this storm is. Now we've got tornado warnings. We've seen quite a few of them.
Than they typically
one up in
are.
Broward County. It looks
in
like
Marathon, Florida now, one of our producers picking up a wind gust at 71 miles per hour. That's just 3 miles per hour away from hurricane strength. So it most likely will become a Category 4. I think there's no doubt in our minds. But again, it's such a massive storm. I want to talk about a couple of things. Coming up at 11 p.m. Eastern time, we'll get a new track. It's interesting to note that we have not lost the westerly component in its movement. Surely by now, we thought that we would see more of a northerly movement, because without that northerly movement, we cannot pinpoint exactly where landfall is going to be. This is a computer model that shows the spin of the storm, and I want to point a couple of things out, because coming up at the top of the hour, we're going to get in closer with Google Earth to look at Marco Island, to look at Naples and Tampa, because of the real estate in this area. But everyone who is going to encounter the eye, such as this area right here in Fort Myers, it's not landfall till half the eye is over land. Keep in mind, as this makes its way northward, on each side of that eye is where the winds are the most intense. I know we always talk about that north right, that front right quadrant. However, as this eye progresses northward, maybe Tampa, all the way up, you're going to encounter intense winds coming in from the east to the west for hours. For hours, you will hear things smashing against your home. I don't want to frighten anybody, just to let you know this is going to happen. You're going to hear the hissing of the wind coming in through cracks of the home. You may lose power, and that's going to go on pretty long time, for a couple of hours. But then you're going to have this eerie calmness. Do not let yourself think that the storm has moved out. You're in the eye. The winds become calm. if you were to look outside, you may see a bunch of birds. They get caught in the eyes because they're trying to keep themselves away from these winds. They'll fly for hundreds of miles trying to rest when they can inside the eye. But don't let your guard down, because not only did you get hit by the east to west wind, now you've got the southern end of the eye, just as intense, but the winds are in the other direction, coming west to east. So all the telephone poles that are in the trees that are bending in one direction, several hours later are going to push in the other direction. So again, it can only take so much, and that's what's going to give. So that's the eye that's going to make its way from south to north across the entire peninsula. We do expect the eye to start to collapse. It's not going to be over water. We're cutting off the fuel line of the system. It's not like Harvey when it was able to feed off its own rainfall. Harvey moved so slow that it actually didn't need to be over water. It was actually feeding off the own rain that it dropped on the ground. Now, it will continue to be strong over the Everglades. It's called the brown ocean effect. It doesn't need to be over water, but it's sucking up that warm water from the Everglades. But once it gets into southern Georgia, Anderson, it'll start to lose its punch and rain itself out by the time it gets into Tennessee. But we're watching this eye, and it's critical right now to see what happens come 11 o'clock with a new track, because I'm surprised we're not seeing more of a northerly component yet. Hard to pinpoint exactly where landfall will be, but obviously we know conditions are deteriorating quickly.
You know, Tom, it's interesting. A lot of people hear you say, you know, don't get fooled by the eye when it seems calm. That's just the eye. Just a quick story. Before I was ever started covering hurricanes as a reporter, I was in a hurricane in the Caribbean that sat around St. Bart's, if memory serves me, for several days. When the eye came, I was so freaked out, frankly, and just so wanting to get out of the room that I was trapped in, the building that I was in. I ran out and was trying to get my friends to go to the airport to see if we could get a flight out.
Wow.
Smarter people than me informed me, this is the eye, dummy. Get back in the house. It's about to hit again, and they were right. So people may laugh about that idea of, you know, you think that you get fooled by the eye. Right. I can tell you, I'm not very intelligent, but I was certainly fooled by the eye then. Not to make that mistake again. Tom, we'll continue to check in with you, and also look in particularly for that 11 o'clock advisory. That's going to have important information that will give you obviously the latest information on that. Another quick break, and our coverage continues.
The southwest of Fort Lauderdale, another in Miami-Dade. We've had one, of course, in Key West. That'll continue to be a threat and for the next several days. But the eye that is just barely off the coast right now has got a secondary band around it. This may be going through an eye wall replacement cycle, which means once that secondary band forms, it tightens up and it spins and gets stronger. Now, 125-mile-per-hour winds, that's sustained, only 5 miles per hour away from Category 4. I have more confidence that it's going to become a Category 4 than where it's going to make landfall. Notice the tornado watch, just the beginning. These bands are moving in. In about 4 or 5 hours, John, is really going to start to come down on you. As we look at this forecast track, landfall is only considered landfall when half that eye crosses a landmass, all right? If this passes Key West, let's say by daybreak, we need to get some kind of wobble in towards the east to have a Fort Myers landfall, which could be somewhere around maybe 2 in the afternoon. If that wobble doesn't take place till Port Charlotte, that may be 9, 10 o'clock at night. But right now, we're still looking at a west-northwesterly track. As it continues northward, it continues to hug, of course, the coast and Tampa. That means on each edge of the eye wall is where the winds are the strongest. Now, everybody's talking about Charlie back in Punta Gorda, right? That had maximum winds from the center only out 25 miles. These maximum winds are out 70, and if it gets stronger, it'll go out to about 100, which we had just the other day. I'm a little concerned about Tampa Bay as we get the system north of you, because that's when your storm surge will come in from a north and a westerly track. So that's a big concern. I'm also concerned about Jacksonville because some of the accumulation rates for rainfall put quite a large amount. As you get the bands of rain in here, just like Matthew last year, significant flooding in Jacksonville, I believe that's St. John's River. So we're going to continue to watch that. Now, I alluded to the fact that once this moves north, John, that the models are all over the place. The good news is, even though it's going to down thousands and thousands of trees, those pine country in the southeast, I think we're going to see the system dry out. So we can move up to the Tennessee Valley and maneuver all at once. If it doesn't have the water source, we're not looking nearly at the type of scenario we had with Harvey stalling in Texas.
All right, Tom Sater for us at the CNN Weather Center. Tom, thanks so much. The message there from Tom, he's concerned.
is in the Weather Center. Allison, let's bring us up to date.
Right, Anderson. So we take a look at what we've got for right now. Again, you've got some imagery here where we can see the latest on Irma. Winds right now 125 miles per hour, gusting up to 155 miles per hour. The movement, it's been what we call wobbling, okay, where it's going back and forth between west and north and west and north. The question is, when does it finally start to make that really sharp turn to the north? We focus on the maximum wind gusts. Notice for the most part, it's the western half of Florida where we have our strongest winds. Key West, this will be our peak maximum wind gust around 138 miles per hour. But say up around Fort Myers, 136, even Tampa going to be in the triple digits, right around 116 miles per hour. The track itself will still take it over portions of the Keys and then riding up along the western coast, making a very close call towards Naples, Fort Myers, even into Tampa. So those are going to be the cities of concern going forward in about the next 36 to 48 hours. Here's a look at the forecast radar. So this shows you not just where it's headed, but where some of the heavy rain is going to be as well. When we get to Sunday morning, this is when we really start to see incredibly heavy downpours for cities like Miami into Fort Myers. Then we push into Sunday afternoon and evening. Now Tampa starting to get some incredibly heavy rainfall. And then the system itself begins to make its way into portions of Georgia and also into South Carolina. Overall rainfall totals, we're talking widespread 6 to 10 inches of rain, but it could even be slightly higher than that, and especially when you get some of those outer bands where you could end up getting incredibly heavy downpours for several hours at a time.
Of what is to come. Time and time again, authorities are telling people, in a storm like this, don't go outside. Don't go to the ocean front to try to take pictures, to look at the storm surge. It's one of the reasons reporters spend time out here so you can watch it on television. You don't have to go out for yourself. And do that. I just want to show you a video that kind of proves the point of those authorities. It's a surveillance camera, observation camera of a person taking pictures of the storm surge at the southernmost point, and you saw what happened to that person. I don't know if we can show it again. They're taking a picture to get a sense of the waves, get knocked over. That person did get up and walk away, so thankfully it seems like they were okay. But just a sign of just how quickly stuff can happen. It can be a sunny day here, and all of a sudden a torrential rain start. And we are likely to see more and more moments like that, unfortunately, in the next 12 to 24 hours. I want to go back to John Berman, who is in Miami for us. John, what kind of winds are you seeing there? Because when we started broadcasting around 8 o'clock, you were already getting very, very strong gusts of winds there.
Yeah, it's consistently been like that most of the evening, Anderson. I should make clear, I have no interest in being that guy in that video you just showed. Not even for you, and not even for TV. But the wind gusts now, 40 miles an hour, I would say, fairly regularly, gusting higher than 50 in some locations in Miami. I think you can tell pretty strong right now. Some of the strongest we've seen, so much that, I have to lean in a little bit. You can see behind me, that boat, which we've been looking at all night, is rocking a lot more than we've seen. And the tide is coming up as well. In the water, we can see it being pushed up against the docks and against the boats. Look, this is Miami, which for much of the week was the major concern. There was fear that Miami would take a direct hit from the eye of Hurricane Irma. I say a direct hit from the eye because Miami's still going to get hit from Hurricane Irma pretty hard. We're expecting it, the strongest winds to come in tomorrow starting at 6 a.m. Much stronger than we're seeing right now. Gusts that could be 30, 40 miles an hour, what we're seeing right now, which is why authorities here are saying do not take this lightly. Don't think just because the eye may not pass over Miami like was feared for so much of the week that this is going to be easy going. It won't be. They're still expecting a storm surge here around 6 feet, which would bring it up over where I'm standing right now. They are still expecting wind gusts to be strong, more than 100 miles an hour in some points, which is why there's a curfew out at Miami Beach. They don't want people out, which is why there have been mandatory evacuations, and which why the authorities are saying if you made plans in Miami Beach, keep them. And don't go home until they tell you it's safe, Anderson, which could be from some time based on the winds we're feeling right now, Anderson.
Yeah, good advice there. John, we'll continue to check in with you. Miguel Marquez is in Punta Gorda, which obviously devastated back in 2004 with Hurricane Charlie. Miguel, talk about the scene there, what you're seeing.
Well, I can tell you that Irma has arrived. The first rain that we are seeing from Irma has just started falling in the last few minutes. The wind is starting to kick up, but it's not much more than a breeze, basically, with a gust every now and again. It actually feels fairly nice. The rain is gently falling at the moment, but clearly it is going to get worse and worse. We had not seen this. We saw a beautiful sunset here tonight, and we could see the dark clouds to the south, but finally it is starting to come this way. It is interesting to watch those maps and see how the storms seem to be coming directly at us, and then they turn very sharply south. People in Punta Gorda are watching this hurricane very closely because, as you mentioned, Charlie devastated this community 13 years ago.
Georgia, and South Carolina could end up picking up, say, 4 to 6 inches of rain. We've noticed the hurricane watches and warnings continue to spread to the north. Hurricane warnings now extending from the northernmost part all the way down to the entire state.
I was able to be joined by Lieutenant General Russell Honore, who, of course, led military efforts in the wake of Hurricane Katrina and did such an amazing job there. Unfortunately, and I say that because I enjoy talking to him, but it's always a tough story when he is around and on site. He joins us tonight from Orlando.
Watches in effect for portions of South Carolina as well as Georgia. Anderson?
You talk about that turn. Any way to estimate when that turn north might occur? Because obviously, there are tens of thousands of people watching that very closely because it's going to affect exactly where this thing goes.
Right. Likely it will happen within the next 6 to 12 hours, but you also have to keep in mind that's getting awfully close to when we expect it to cross over the Florida Keys. You've got a couple of things driving it. You've got a high-pressure system sitting out here over the open Atlantic. You've got a high-pressure sitting right around Texas coastline. Those two combinations are what's going to...
Rain's starting to fall pretty steadily here in Fort Myers, not particularly strong, but just probably the steadiest rain that we have seen all day, obviously a harbinger of what is to come. Time and time again, authorities are telling people, in a storm like this, don't go outside, don't go to the ocean front to try to take pictures, to look at the storm surge. It's one of the reasons reporters spend time out here so you can watch it on television. You don't have to go out for yourself. And do that. I just want to show you a video that kind of proves the point of those authorities. It's a surveillance camera, observation camera of a person taking pictures of the storm surge at the southernmost point, and you saw what happened to that person. I don't know if we can show it again. They're taking a picture to get a sense of the waves, get knocked over. That person did get up and walk away, so thankfully it seems like they were okay. But just a sign of just how quickly stuff can happen. It can be a sunny day here, and all of a sudden a torrential rain start. And we are likely to see more and more moments like that, unfortunately, in the next 12 to 24 hours. I want to go back to John Berman, who is in Miami for us. John, what kind of winds are you seeing there? Because when we started broadcasting around 8 o'clock, you were already getting very, very strong gusts of winds there.
Yeah, it's consistently been like that most of the evening, Anderson. I should make clear, I have no interest in being that guy in that video you just showed. Not even for you, and not even for TV. But the wind gusts now, 40 miles an hour, I would say, fairly regularly, gusting higher than 50 in some locations in Miami. I think you can tell pretty strong right now. Some of the strongest we've seen, so much that, I have to lean in a little bit. You can see behind me, that boat, which we've been looking at all night, is rocking a lot more than we've seen. And the tide is coming up as well. In the water, we can see it being pushed up against the docks and against the boats. Look, this is Miami, which for much of the week was the major concern. There was fear that Miami would take a direct hit from the eye of Hurricane Irma. I say a direct hit from the eye because Miami's still going to get hit from Hurricane Irma pretty hard. We're expecting it, the strongest winds to come in tomorrow starting at 6 a.m. Much stronger than we're seeing right now. Gusts that could be 30, 40 miles an hour, what we're seeing right now, which is why the authorities here are saying, do not take this lightly. Don't think, just because the eye may not pass over Miami like was feared for so much of the week, that this is going to be easy going. It won't be. They're still expecting a storm surge here around 6 feet, which would bring it up over where I'm standing right now. They are still expecting wind gusts to be strong, more than 100 miles an hour in some points, which is why there's a curfew out at Miami Beach. They don't want people out, which is why there have been mandatory evacuations, and why the authorities are saying, if you made plans in Miami Beach, keep them. And don't go home until they tell you it's safe, Anderson, which could be from some time based on the winds we're feeling right now, Anderson.
Yeah, good advice there. John, we'll continue to check in with you. Miguel Marquez is in Punta Gorda, which obviously devastated back in 2004 with Hurricane Charlie. Miguel, talk about the scene there, what you're seeing.
Well, I can tell you that Irma has arrived. The first rain that we are seeing from Irma has just started falling in the last few minutes. The wind is starting to kick up, but it's not much more than a breeze, basically, with a gust every now and again. It actually feels fairly nice. The rain is gently falling at the moment, but clearly it is going to get worse and worse. We had not seen this. We saw a beautiful sunset here tonight, and we could see the dark clouds to the south, but finally it is starting to come this way. It is interesting to watch those maps and see how the storms seem to be coming directly at us, and then they turn very sharply south. People in Punta Gorda are watching this hurricane very closely because, as you mentioned, Charlie devastated this community 13 years ago. The path that Irma is currently on, it's just to the west of this community, and that puts them just off that right-hand side, that upper right-hand side of the eye wall. So people are very concerned. They are calling for a very big storm surge here, 10 to 15 feet, basically a giant wave of water that comes in from the ocean and washes everything out with it in relatively short order. That's why they've had to evacuate about 60% of the county here. They only have enough high land here for 3 shelters. All of them jam-packed now. They're saying they have 5 other shelters in the county north of here that residents here could use. If you need shelter, go there. Anderson?
Yeah. The difficulty, of course, is getting there. Is there any public transportation tomorrow, that you know of, to get to those shelters for people who don't have access to vehicles?
There's no public transportation that I know of, but there are vehicles available. There's emergency vehicles and others that can help transport people on a sort of a one-off basis to places if necessary, so they can make that happen. It's not a huge Miami-Dade-like situation. It's a much smaller population here, so it is somewhat easier to deal with those situations. So they do have some ability for that. If people are in dire necessity and they show up to a shelter that is full, they will take them in any event. If their car is out of gas, if they're elderly, if they're disabled somehow, they will be able to get them in. Anderson?
Yeah, that's some good news. Miguel Marquez, thanks very much. Again, that gentle rain that Miguel is experiencing, I think that's the same band that we are experiencing here, and it is pretty gentle. I mean, at the height of a hurricane, the rain is coming in horizontally, and some of the hurricanes I've been in, it feels like pinpricks at times. It's moving so fast, it's hitting you so hard. We're going to take a short break, and our coverage continues.
Going to be driving it to push that right-hand turn over the main peninsula of Florida. Then you also have that high that's over the main portion of the U.S. that's going to break away. That's what's going to allow the storm, once it crosses into places like Georgia and Tennessee, and take its track from there. But ultimately, Anderson, again, 6 hours versus 12. We know it's likely going to happen in that time period. But if it happens 6 versus 12, there's a huge difference there on who actually will end up taking the ultimate landfall. So again, while we have a range, the opposite ends of that range could mean huge differences for several cities.
Is in the Weather Center. Allison, let's bring us up to date.
Right, Anderson. So we take a look at what we've got for right now. Again, you've got some imagery here where we can see the latest on Irma. Winds right now 125 miles per hour, gusting up to 155 miles per hour. The movement, it's been what we call wobbling, okay, where it's going back and forth between west and north and west and north. The question is, when does it finally start to make that really sharp turn to the north? We focus on the maximum wind gusts. Notice for the most part, it's the western half of
Florida, the county government employees, some other
winds.
Response agencies, and everybody is pretty settled in pretty well tonight.
Yeah, obviously, a lot of people woke up. They didn't expect the storm to be hitting along the West Coast in the way that it's going to, and changed their mind about riding out the storm, decided to seek shelters. The governor had put out an appeal for as many as 1,000 volunteer nurses, particularly to help out in special needs shelters. Do you know if you have enough personnel, particularly in those special needs shelters, to help all those people who need assistance?
Well, we're doing pretty well. We have them in and settled. We have spent a lot of time in our shelter making sure that we had all types of equipment and resources available to them. We're using a lot of our Collier County EMS paramedics, some of our local fire paramedics, nurses, volunteers, and the state of Florida has been bringing some skilled nursing groups from out of state. So we're doing pretty well. Obviously, we've got another day or two ahead of us. We'll be working to try to rotate those personnel through, but our special needs shelter is very robust, although we weren't expecting the census that we have, but we're working to accommodate that.
And if, for those who wake up in the morning in your county and decide, you know what, I don't like the way the storm surge is going to be, it's worse than I thought it's going to be, and decide to try to go to shelter, how do they find out what shelters are still open and are still able to receive people? And do you have any advice for people who don't have access to a vehicle in terms of how they could possibly get to a shelter? Because I know a lot of, obviously, the public transportation has stopped for a variety of reasons late this afternoon.
Well, and we do have a telephone hotline, a number that people can call, and we are looking at some alternative resources. And we may have some periods tomorrow where we can do some bus pickups. We'll certainly work with the community, find some additional resources. We really think that the bulk of the folks that wanted to be in a shelter are squared away there tonight. So we'll continue to look at resources. We have the entire Emergency Operations Center up with a lot of options and a lot of resources. So we'll do our very best to support those needs.
Oh, Dan Summers, I appreciate all your efforts. Thanks very much. Stay safe. We're going to take a short break as our coverage from Fort Myers and all across Florida tonight continues.
West, this will be our peak maximum wind gusts around 138 miles per hour. But stay up around Fort Myers, 136, even Tampa going to be in the triple digits, right around 116 miles per hour. The track itself will still take it over portions of the Keys and then riding up along the western coast, making it very close call towards Naples, Fort Myers, even into Tampa. So those are going to be the cities of concern going forward in about the next 36 to 48 hours. Here's a look at the forecast radar. So this shows you not just where it's headed, but where some of the heavy rain is going to be as well. When we get to Sunday morning, this is when we really start to see incredibly heavy downpours for cities like Miami into Fort Myers. Then we push into Sunday afternoon and evening. Now Tampa starting to get some incredibly heavy rainfall. And then the system itself begins to make its way into portions of Georgia and also into South Carolina. Overall rainfall totals, we're talking widespread, 6 to 10 inches of rain, but it could even be slightly higher than that, and especially when you get some of those outer bands where you could end up getting incredibly heavy downpours for several hours at a time. But the rain spreads even farther north, so even states like Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina could end up picking up, say, 4 to 6 inches of rain. We've noticed the hurricane watches and warnings continue to spread to the north. Hurricane warnings now extending from the northernmost part all the way down through the entire, and we now have tropical storm watches in effect for portions of South Carolina as well as Georgia. Anderson?
You talk about that turn. Any way to estimate when that turn north might occur? Because obviously, there are tens of thousands of people watching that very closely because it's going to affect exactly where this thing goes.
Right. Likely it will happen within the next 6 to 12 hours, but you also have to keep in mind that's getting awfully close to when we expect it to cross over the Florida Keys. You've got a couple of things driving it. You've got a high pressure system sitting out here over the open Atlantic. You've got a high pressure sitting right around the Texas coastline. Those two combinations are what's going to be driving it to push that right-hand turn over the main peninsula of Florida. Then you also have that high that's over the main portion of the U.S. that's going to break away. That's what's going to allow the storm, once it crosses into places like Georgia and Tennessee, and take its track from there. But ultimately, Anderson, again, 6 hours versus 12. We know it's likely going to happen in that time period. But if it happens 6 versus 12, there's a huge difference there on who actually will end up taking the ultimate landfall. So again, while we have a range, the opposite ends of that range could mean huge differences for several cities.
Keys, and maybe most importantly on the west coast of Florida, and when? Allison.
That's right, John. So we take a look at the current numbers that we have right now. Irma is a Category 3 storm, but a very strong Category 3 storm.
It's interesting to note,
right now,
the National Hurricane Center is now updating us every hour. Something unprecedented, I believe, happened today. We'll have to check on this. But because we had Jose, Katia, and Irma, Typically, the National Hurricane Center handles all of these advisories, but they're getting overloaded. So the NOAA Storm Prediction Center took over command for Katia and Jose, so the National Hurricane Center can solely focus on Irma. I believe that's unprecedented. So they're updating us every hour now. Little fluctuation in the speed, down another 5 miles per hour, even though it went back up. That's not a big concern because we've got plenty of time, unfortunately, that this thing will develop stronger. We know that's going to happen. Only 100 miles now from Key West. So that's what we're going to talk about as we get in here. There's a couple of factors, and we're going to break it down with a Google Earth for you as well. But first, everybody's wondering what happened. I mean, why did this make such a dramatic shift come this morning? We knew that there were going to be shifts. Earlier in the week, it was shifting east and then west a little bit. And again, the track, which will come out at 11 p.m., may differ somewhat. But let's go back because we had a massive area of high pressure over the Atlantic. It's called the Bermuda High. And we thought for a while there that come today and tomorrow, what we thought we would see is this area of high pressure was either going to break down or slide eastward. But because it's held its strength, the winds that circulate clockwise kept Irma on this westerly track to the south. Another trough dropping in from the northeastern U.S. we thought would be able to pick this system up sooner. But it's not as strong as we originally expected. So it's not a big force northward just yet. We still have a west-northwesterly movement. So that is a big concern right now. It's not going to slide in the Gulf. High pressure in Texas is going to halt its progress that way. At some point, it's got to go to the north. Let me show you now, if we could break this down, what is a big concern. There have only been 3 Category 5s to ever make landfall in the United States. The last one was Andrew 25 years ago, Camille in 69, and then in 1935, before they even named these hurricanes, it was the Labor Day hurricane of 1935 that actually cut right through the Keys and isolated Key West and the Keys from the rest of Florida. As we get in closer here, there's a couple of things that could happen. We could have a landfall in this direction here. We could have a landfall over here in Key West. Now, that's critical to understand because when we get in closer and you take a look, let's get into the Key West Naval Station. There is one road in and one out. This, again, could isolate the Keys in the days ahead. In the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, unfortunately, there was a story of a packed train on a train track that did not know that the storm was coming. Many did not, and it unfortunately knocked the train off the tracks with several fatalities. If we get in closer now, I want to go back and let's get into Marco Island because look at the real estate. Notice the inlets. When you get in the area of green, it's more wetlands down toward the south and the southwest of Florida. That's fine. There's not many roads. In fact, Alligator Alley is one of the only ones. If we get in even closer, you'll see just the magnitude of real estate and homes that will be inundated with over 9, 10 feet of water. If we continue now onward, we can move up toward Naples. Notice the inlets. When you have a storm surge of this magnitude, many do not understand that it's not just coming over the beaches and over the dunes. It can go in several miles. Coming up in the next half hour, we're going to break down the storm surge inundation map for you. That's from the National Hurricane Center, and you'll notice how far in the water goes. And we're talking 10, 12 miles. This is not something to take lightly. Now the problem in Tampa. If the track makes its way, and right now we will believe it will be somewhere out here toward Tampa, but if it stays more in this westerly track, Anderson, and stays off the shore, that's probably the worst case scenario for Tampa and St. Pete, because this inundation of that surge will move up into these areas, and it'll be even greater than anyone expected. That's if it takes that track. I'm more concerned that after Irma moves north of Tampa, because then what we're going to find is the winds coming around on the backside will come in from the west, northwest. So once you think that the storm is past and everything is fine, you're going to get inundated again on the backside of the storm, on the southern end of that eye. That's a wide range of winds, and that surge will continue for some time, even if the storm is well north. So a lot of concerns in the hours and days ahead. Again, as we continue to monitor this, we're still waiting on a northerly turn, because until that happens, again, the National Hurricane Center, these are the best of the world. The men and women who work here are the best in the world. So we will see what the models do. We will see if there's more of a shift westward. There is no best case scenario here, because even people in the southeast and areas of Miami up toward Boca Raton, if you think that you're in the clear here, unfortunately, our tornado watches will start increasing off toward areas of the north and northeast, and it'll continue that way all the way on the Carolina coast. Anderson.
Yeah. Tom, I really appreciate that level of detail seeing in the Florida Keys and also in Tampa. Really gives, I think, our viewers a sense of some of what to look for tomorrow and some of the dangers, not just of the storm, but also of the aftermath. As you said, people think the worst is over, and then depending on the winds, depending on where it's coming from, more water could be coming in. We'll continue to check in with you, Tom, and as we await an update on the track of the storm. John Berman, of course, standing by still in Miami. He joins us now. John, we're seeing some light rain here. It has been quite windy, though, for you throughout the evening.
Yeah, look, every time I think there's going to be a break here, and right now the rain has let up, we get one of these giant wind gusts that almost takes me off my feet, and it will get much worse as the hours continue, looking to be at its absolute worst here in Miami sometime after 6 a.m., 6 all the way until noon tomorrow. It's going to be very, very rough here. Look, Tom Sater, you guys were talking about, whether or not Miami is in the clear. The facts tonight is clearly we're not in the clear here in Miami. We've had these wind gusts over 40 miles an hour, up to 50 in some cases, heavy, heavy rain. And here, just like everywhere else, Anderson, there is concern about the storm surge. There's this boat that's been behind me rocking all night long, and I don't think it's going to get any better for that boat as the hours continue, as the waters continue to push in. We're on one of these intercoastal waterways. Miami Beach, which is more low-lying, is out past me that way. Then there's this intercoastal waterway, and the water here will rise. If it goes up 6 feet, it would be above where I'm standing. In some areas in downtown Miami, not just Miami Beach, but downtown Miami, would see some water, which would be a serious cause for concern, which is why the authorities here are saying, continue, please take this very seriously as the night goes on, and don't think about coming home. If you've evacuated, if you're in a shelter, if you're at a friend's house inland, stay there. Stay there until the authorities tell you it's safe to come back, because this will go on for some time. Anderson?
Yeah, I know some people who had evacuated from Miami to end up in Tampa woke up today and thinking maybe I should head back to Miami. Again, one of those difficult decisions people have to make. We're going to take a short break. We're going to talk to the mayor here in Fort Myers about what he is anticipating in the hours ahead. We'll be right back.
Miles per hour, just 5 miles per hour stronger, and it would be a Category 4 storm. So I want you to understand, you're talking a difference of 5 miles per hour here. So don't focus on the category number so much, but the intensity of the winds. Movement is west at about 9 miles per hour, but we have started to see at least a slight shift off to the north as well. One of the big concerns is going to be maximum wind gusts. Take a look at some of these numbers. Key West, we're talking around 138 miles per hour. This will be at the peak as the storm is crossing over that region. Naples and Fort Myers also in that 130 to 130 mile per hour range. Even Tampa likely to be around 116. Now the East Coast, while it may not be as strong, you're still talking pretty strong wind gusts. In fact, Orlando looking at 95 miles per hour for their peak wind gust. Storm surge is also going to be a huge threat with this particular storm. We got some updated numbers a few hours ago that really made these numbers rise. In fact, especially in the southwest portion, say Naples down towards Key Largo, we're talking 10 to 15 feet. Miami down towards Key West, 5 to 10 feet. Even around the Fort Myers area, you're talking 6 to 10 feet. The numbers, however, you have to understand what they mean. So let's take a look at this, for example. Just to talk about storm surge. 10 feet is what an average first-story building is. So if you have storm surge of 10 feet, and keep in mind, some places we're actually forecasting higher than 10 feet. Some areas it could be as much as 15 feet, which means it would start creeping into the second story of a home or a business or something like that. But this is just the storm surge. Now you also have to factor in the waves. This is where true inundation takes place, because it's not just the amount of rain or not just the amount of water that has been pushed in from the storm surge, but those waves, the crests of those waves can add even a couple more feet on top of that. So you talk about 5 to 6 feet. If you've got a person that's 6 feet tall, you are now completely submerged underwater, and you've got the waves moving everything around. This is where it gets very concerning, especially those higher amounts too. You could have cars submerged. So if you take that car out onto a street as the storm surge is pushing in, you will have absolutely no control over that vehicle, even though the car may not be fully submerged at that point. Now, when we talk about the track, this is the part that everybody is concerned about, because you want to know where landfall is expected to be. However, because of the size of the storm, at this point, that really is just semantics. Every everybody around Florida is going to get some impact from this storm. Some will just get bigger impacts than others, namely the winds. Here's what we expect. We do expect it to increase back to a Category 4 strength storm as it crosses over the Keys and continues its way up the west coast. Right now, landfall could be anywhere from, say, Naples to Fort Myers, even up around Tampa. And Tampa is a huge city. A lot of people in Tampa did not necessarily evacuate, especially several days ago, thinking this was mostly going to be an East Coast main landfall of a storm. But that is now starting to change. Then we see the track kind of push further into the north, states like Alabama, Georgia, as well as Tennessee. And the other thing, John, to note is we are still talking a pretty good amount of rain. We've talked about storm surge. We've talked about wind. But don't count out the rain. We could be looking at widespread rainfall totals of 6 to 12 inches of rain.
All right, Allison Chinchar, an important forecast, the point that people should really listen to there, where you're talking about.
That's right. So one of the things that has just changed at the top of the hour is the forward movement, the direction in which the storm is moving. Right now, we're starting to see a change from due west to west-northwest. That may seem very subtle, but that's what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for that shift in which it is going to start to make that northward trek towards the state of Florida. And we're starting to at least get a little bit of a glimpse of that. Again, it's not a sharp turn, at least as of this point, but we're starting to see that change over. Now, one of the main concerns with this storm is still going to be incredibly strong winds. At landfall point, for a lot of these areas, these are your maximum wind gusts you're going to be dealing with. 138 miles per hour in Key West, 136 in Fort Myers. Even Tampa going to be looking at 160.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma. We've had the benefit of talking to so many officials throughout the day, and we continue with that. The mayor of Fort Myers very kindly agreed to come out again for us tonight. Randall Henderson, thanks so much for being with us and standing out in the rain with us. First of all, you and I, before we went on air, were talking about a potential silver lining. As bad as this storm is going to be, and who knows what it's going to mean for Fort Myers, there may be a plus to some of it.
Well, I'm encouraged in this way, Anderson, since it is coming further west, this is going to open up channels to the east to get provisions into us post-Irma, which is going to be essential for meeting the needs of our citizens. So I'm encouraged about that. As a leader, you're already looking beyond. You have to look days ahead. We are days ahead. We're staging. We have energy companies and petroleum companies and food and rations and all those things positioned and ready to deliver once we're able to do so. You were telling me also before in the commercial break, you ran to 3 of your neighbors today and convinced them to get out, and this was just late this afternoon. I took a short break to get my own affairs in order, to mobilize family members, and in doing so, I came across neighbors and implored them to evacuate and explain why, and I'm happy to announce that they took it very serious, and they are on their way to Gainesville, to Atlanta, to the East Coast to seek refuge. Because I feel like we were seeing that just a lot today. People, again, who woke up realizing it's a different storm now, thinking you could ride it out, and then throughout the day started to think, oh, you know what, I better get out of here. I'm so proud of our citizens for taking this serious, Anderson. This is an epic situation on our hands. Never been known to us in American history, and they are taking it serious, and we're working vigilantly to preserve life. We can repair tangible things. We cannot repair a life. And just again, I mean, I've asked this question to a lot of people, but I do think it's important for those who don't have access to vehicles, who may be less fortunate, even homeless who decide tomorrow, I think I should try to get shelter. Probably should have done it sooner, but is there any way for them to get to a shelter? It is not too late. Please dial 211. We'll get help to you. We can get transport. We can get you to a safe place. And bottom line, for those people watching tonight in this area, what's your message? My message is be vigilant. If there was ever a time to be bold, now's the time to be bold. Be decisive. Take action. Mr. Mayor, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Good luck to you tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you to everybody here and throughout Florida. Ed Lavandera is now back in Naples. He was drove over to Marcos Island. He is back in Naples. What's it like there now? Because obviously that is a place that, according to estimates, could be expecting as much as 10 to 15 feet of storm surge, depending on the exact track of the storm.
Well, if there is good news emerging from Naples, is that the mayor of the city told us this afternoon that he believes that many, perhaps most of the people here in Naples evacuated in the days even before the track started moving west of this hurricane. So that is the good news. If you look outside as we drive around here, the city streets empty, and it has been like this throughout the day, Anderson. Many of those people, as the mayor believes, had evacuated earlier in the week when it was clear that Hurricane Irma was going to make a significant impact here in South Florida, and many of those people started evacuating. So there's some 27 shelters that are open throughout this Collier County down here around Naples, and we're told that 3 of them still have availability, and obviously it is still not too late to get to those locations. But we also just ventured down to Marco Island, popular vacation spot, an island where there's some more than 16,000 people that live there full time. We spoke with the police chief, and I asked him if it's too late to evacuate, and this is what he had to say.
It's too late. It's called, what we say, it's right now we're at shelter in place. Or you would do what we ask people to do if they're in a home, is the vertical evacuation. That means if they have a second story, they go to high above the water line as they possibly can. If they're in a single family home or a one-story home, we ask that they get to a neighbor's house that has a second story where they can get higher above the water line.
And Anderson, as we drive along one of the main streets here in Naples tonight, you can see actually just that spot right there you saw on your right, one of the few places that is open, a sports bar that we were told is going to be open until about 2 o'clock this morning. But as we continue driving, you see a number of the businesses boarded up, and they have been like this, as I mentioned, Anderson, throughout the day. This town was described by the mayor as simply a ghost town at this point. Anderson?
Yeah. Ed, be careful out there for you and your crew driving along those roads in Naples for us tonight. Randy Kay is up in Tampa, which is about a 2-hour drive in normal times, I believe, hour and a half to 2 hours from Fort Myers. Randy, just, I talked to the mayor of Tampa earlier today, who said that up until today, based on the track of this storm, which they thought was going to be more of an eastern storm, Tampa was kind of looking at the resources that they could send to other places that needed help. Today, with the storm moving further west, they realize now they are in the line that they may be the ones in the days ahead needing folks from other communities to help them.
Yeah, in fact, Anderson, we talked to somebody from the Red Cross just a short time ago, and they're first moving their resources here to Tampa because they had moved them all to Miami. So now that Tampa is back in the track, they're trying to get situated here. But I got to tell you, when we pulled into Tampa just earlier this evening, it was a ghost town. There was no traffic as we made our way from where you are in Fort Myers up to here. There was nobody on the streets. There was nobody on the highway on 75 North. It's really, really quiet here, and the air is beautiful. We had a beautiful sunset, but everybody here knows the storm is certainly coming. And as you know, they also know that in Fort Myers. As we made our way here, we passed this massive shelter, this Germain Arena, which is the hockey arena, just on the edge of Fort Myers there. We could see it from the highway, and there were thousands of people lined up trying to get inside there, trying to get away, trying to find safety from Hurricane Irma. And that is mainly because they, too, saw that the track changed. They were planning to ride it out at home, so they decided to try and get inside into the shelter. And they brought everything with them, everything that they love, their families, their dogs, their cats, you name it. They had canned food. They had bags, they had sleeping bags, anything they could just to try and ride it out inside this shelter. And they waited for hours, some of them 4, 5, 6 hours. Here's just a sampling of what some of them told us, Anderson.
We changed our itinerary every time you looked at the map.
Yeah, we've been to
trying to figure out.
Should we go to Atlanta? No, we'll go to Kissimmee. No, we'll stay at my cousin's house. No, we'll go to another shelter. Should we stay in our house? No, now we're at this shelter.
Do you feel like you waited too long to decide?
Yeah, totally. I wanted to leave on Monday.
Yeah, my fault.
It's like if it's the biggest hurricane ever, just leave and then you're not stuck. Gas was great on Monday.
How long have you been waiting in line?
About 4 hours. It's been a long wait.
Is this your only hope for shelter from Irma?
Well, yes, with animals, yes, it is, yeah. Unfortunately, things are closing fast.
You're at the end here. How do you feel about that?
Well, It's all right. I came with my elderly neighbor who's 87 and couldn't walk well, so he went to the front of the line, and I hope to somehow find him in there.
I got to tell you, people had a really good attitude. Like that last woman you just saw there. She said that, you know what, she's a camper. She's camped her whole life. She's ready for this. She's ready to go inside. We talked to a lieutenant from the Florida Highway Patrol. He says that he was trying to make it as comfortable for everyone inside. It could hold 8,000. When we were there, about 1,000 people had already moved in to the arena. He said that it would have air conditioning, clean water, food, snacks, whatever these folks needed. But Anderson, I got to tell you, as we walked through that line, which really wound through that entire parking lot, there was this look of desperation on so many of these people's faces. They didn't know if they could get inside. They didn't know that there was that much space at the time. And they really didn't have anywhere else to go. Many of them had waited too long, or they just couldn't get out of town. And it was tough to see. But it sounds like a lot of them, perhaps most of them, or maybe even all of them, did get inside that shelter, Anderson.
Yeah, that's good news. Randy, I want to go to Donnie Lee. He's the chief of police in Key West. Chief, thanks so much for joining us. What's your biggest concern tonight as you await this storm? It's about 100 miles from Key West.
Well, Anderson, my biggest concern is what we're going to find tomorrow when the sun rises and we're able to start responding, hopefully at some point, to calls for service and assessing, the damages and stuff here. There's still, far too many people that remain on the island that we're concerned about for their welfare and their well-being. So, we just don't know what to expect, really.
Do you have a sense of how many people have decided to ride out the storm? And it's always a difficult thing to kind of estimate. It's not like people kind of register. Do you have any idea?
I mean, don't have exact numbers, but, there's still thousands of people that remain here on the island. I mean, our population is 25,000, so we know that there's still thousands of people who decided to stay. We did everything possible to urge and beg everyone to evacuate, and unfortunately, not everyone made, the best decision, and those decisions today have, life and death consequences. They're here at their own risk because we're hunkered down in the police department. We already have tropical storm force winds. We're not going to put our police officers and first responders at risk anymore. The hospitals are closed. They've been closed for 2 days. There's no ambulance. There's no fire. So, people are all, right now, they're out there on their own to fend for themselves right now, unfortunately.
And Chief, during the worst of the storm, obviously, as you said, when you're hunkered down and not able to go out, if 911 calls are coming in, are those just kind of registered and kind of put in order of priority so that when you are able to go back out, you start to respond to those? Is that how that works?
That's exactly right. All the 911 calls are recorded, and we're also, logging them in by hand as well. And as you said, we're just going to have to prioritize them when we're able to respond and start addressing each one.
Yeah, and of course, mobility, the roads, you got to make sure the roads are clear before you can even respond in some areas. Chief, we'll let you go. I know you've got a lot of work ahead of you. Thanks so much for talking to us, and wish you the best for all of you and your officers and all first responders. Stay safe. We're going to take a short break. More ahead.
15 miles per hour at its strongest point for the storm. The track still does take it along the west coast, but it's likely going to make its first landfall, if you will, in the U.S. over the Florida Keys. Exactly where, that is still yet to be determined. We have to wait to find out how quickly the storm makes that sharp turn to the north to really be able to tell exactly where the storm is going to go. It's then likely to go along places like Naples, Fort Myers, into Tampa, and then eventually it will move all inland and then push towards the states like Georgia, Alabama, and into Tennessee. One of the key things that we expect for this storm is that it will re-intensify back to a Category 4 storm. The main reason for that, take a look at how warm the water is in this region, upper 80s. That is the perfect fuel for a storm like this to be able to intensify, and that's what we expect it to do before it finally makes landfall. Now, we've been hearing a lot of this. People want to know, what is the timing for a lot of these cities in Florida? So let's take a look at Tampa, for example. Tropical storm winds will have already arrived in
some of these areas by tomorrow afternoon. Hurricane force winds will likely already be in Tampa by tomorrow evening. Rainfall could be looking at 6 to 8 inches of rain and the storm surge around 5 to 8 feet. Now we move to Naples, a little bit farther south of Tampa. Tropical storm winds will arrive early tomorrow morning. Hurricane force winds could arrive, say, just shortly after sunrise on Sunday. Then we talk about rainfall. This is where we could be looking at really heavy amounts of rain. We're talking nearing a foot of rain, and some of the areas just outside of Naples could pick up, say, as much as 15 inches of rain. Storm surge is also going to be a big factor, 10 to 15 feet for this region. Here's a look at the radar going forward to show you not just the direction, but also where those heavy rain bands are going to be. Again, on Sunday, we expect it early morning to cross over the Keys, then continue its trek up the west coast. We're talking Naples, Fort Myers, into Tampa, then pushing up towards Jacksonville and into the state of Georgia. It's still going to take incredibly strong winds into places like South Carolina and Georgia, which is why those states also have tropical storm watches. Even though we expect the storm to actually weaken a bit before it makes it into those areas, it's not going to weaken entirely. They are still going to get some impacts. Miami is already starting to see some of those impacts as we speak, and hurricane force winds, guys, will be arriving as early as tomorrow morning. That's right. So at the top of the hour, we got our latest update. And the biggest thing we noticed that had changed was the direction of the storm as a whole, the forward movement now going from due west to slightly north, which means this could be the final straw before we really see this thing take that sharp turn to the north, which we've been expecting. Now, right now, winds are still 125 miles per hour, about 5 miles per hour off from being a Category 4. And we do expect it to re-intensify up to Category 4 strength before it crosses over the Florida Keys and makes its way up the western coast of the Florida Peninsula. But a lot of people keep wanting to know, why is it going to make such a sharp turn to the north? Why not just keep going out over the open Gulf and head to the west? Because in theory, that's the track that it's been taking for much of its life. But there's a few things that you need to understand. Atmospherically, that's what's been going on. What has been steering it the last few days has been this high pressure just south of Bermuda. That's been guiding it to the west. But once it gets far enough west, it's now going to start to interact with this high pressure system just off the coast of Texas. That's going to block it from going too far into the Gulf. It's going to continue to slide up the peninsula, and then this high pressure over the main portion of the U.S. is going to push out of the way, allowing that storm, at this point a remnant low, to really be able to push pretty far inland into portions of even Kentucky or Tennessee. So that's where most of the steering with this storm is going to come into play. In terms of the biggest impacts out of this storm, winds are certainly going to be one of the top ones. This information coming to us from the National Weather Service, this is going to be your peak wind gusts, the highest it's expected to get. We're talking 135 around Key West, 134 in Fort Myers, 132 in Tampa. These are new numbers coming into us. The highest number that we saw was in excess of 145 miles per hour, potentially along the western edge of Florida. Storm surge also going to be a big threat with this storm as well. Around Miami, we're looking at 4 to 6 feet. Areas of Key West, 5.
Our coverage of Hurricane Irma continues. You know, we were talking to John Berman and people in Miami earlier this evening about the concerns that authorities had in Miami that since this storm, there's now been so much focus on the West Coast that people in Miami might not take that as seriously. That concern runs all along the eastern coast of southern Florida. Greg Orvik is the mayor of Port St. Lucie, which is just north of West Palm Beach, Florida, if memory serves me correct. Mr. Mayor, first of all, did I get the location correct? And also, is that a big concern for you tonight, that people feel like, well, this isn't in the going to feel the full force of the storm?
Yes and yes, Anderson. So as you know, a big issue a lot of times with storm preparation is, will your citizenry take it seriously? But because of what we saw happen in Houston and the greater state of Texas, and then also with this historic hurricane forming so far east out in the Atlantic and becoming such a powerhouse, everyone has been ready. And because of the track continuing to change and evolve over time, we've been hunkered down now for several days. And with that focus going to the West Coast, we do not want our population, our 185,000 citizens, or anyone on the East Coast of Florida to poke their head out too soon. Because as you know all too well, this is the time now where we're starting to have the tornado warnings and tornadoes in the area, and the weather is just really starting to get here. And for us, this will be a Sunday event. So to all of our residents out there and everyone watching on the East Coast, please stay the course and stay safe.
Well, in terms of tomorrow, I mean, what kind of hours are you most concerned about? I mean, do you have a sense of what sort of the worst hours are going to be for Port St. Lucie?
Yes, Anderson, and you know, we go with the resources provided by CNN and your favorite meteorologists, but you can't beat the National Hurricane Center. And again, please, as you know all too well, this is being updated on 6-hour intervals, even more frequently now. It's under radar lock. But all of our residents and viewers should be locked into those resources that they trust so they can stay up to date. Right now, we're counting on kind of a 7 a.m. Type start that would really last the whole day, where we're subject to tropical storm force winds. And why that's so important to government officials like us is because our first responders can no longer respond to emergency calls once those winds reach that tropical storm force.
Well, Mr. Mayor, we're going to continue checking with you. We appreciate that, and I hope the folks in Port St. Lucie and also all over the East are heeding that kind of warning, not to take this lightly at all. This is a deadly storm already. The death toll still rising as we're finding out more about what's happening in the Caribbean. We'll continue to check in with you in the hours and the days ahead. I want to go to Tom Sater, though, just for an update. Tom, I believe you have some new information about Key West and some of the force of the winds that have finally hit Key West.
Yeah, Key West is now reporting, Anderson, our very first hurricane wind gusts at 74 miles per hour. Anything at 74 miles per hour or greater is hurricane strength, so it's begun. I want to take a look at our track, which we will get a new one at the top of the hour. But notice the cone of uncertainty. We continue to watch the storm move west-northwesterly. So we're not getting that northerly component just yet. But where it moves, especially around Naples to Tampa, is critical here. And then turn off toward areas putting Atlanta in the worst position for the possible winds. That's that front right quadrant. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on that. Again, the eye still off the coast. We're not looking at an eye wall, per se, around the center of the eye. But notice how we have the bright colors now. That is the eye wall replacement cycle. So once that band starts to tighten up, then we're going to have an increase in our speed. Again, we don't have any tornado warnings right now, but I do want to go back to what we mentioned just moments ago when I took you through the Keys. And then, of course, we went into Fort Myers. I want to back up just a little bit and show you parts of around where we were talking about in Marco Island. This is a storm surge inundation map that is issued by the National Hurricane Center. And Anderson, this is almost a worst case scenario. It's the 90th percentile of our probabilities and our damage. Everything you see in blue is 1 to 3 feet. In yellow is 3 to 6. In orange is 6 to 9. And then in red is greater than 9. Now, this is the Everglades. This is fine. No one lives down here. But that is well inland. Let's go up to Naples a little bit. Notice actually down in the Keys, you'll see as well, we've got some yellow in here. That's 1 to 3. But when you talk about Naples, and again, on the coastline, significant inundation with the storm surge, and it goes 10, 12 miles inland. I mean, this is not to be taken lightly. Even if it's 1 to 3 feet, 12 miles inland, that's going to do some major flooding. All right, to the north, there's Bonita Springs. We're going to continue to go up. Here's Marco Island. Now, I mentioned this earlier. We showed this map on Google Earth. And the thousands and thousands and thousands of homes. This gives you an idea now of you're over 9, 10, 11 feet of water, and it continues through all the inlets. Now to the north, as we continue our progress, we're going to take you up to, here we go. All right, here's Cape Coral. You can see Port Charlotte. Notice the red inundation around all the islands and inlets. You get into Fort Myers, you're well into plus 9 to 10 feet. Well inland, about a mile, a couple of miles, in fact, in some cases, all the way up to Ogle. Now, again, we're going to continue to make our way northward. This is Charlie came in, I hit Punta Gorda. Their winds only extended outward 25 miles per hour. This one extends 70. It's going to get to 100. One more stop up to the north, if we can take you up toward Tampa. And this is why they don't have the bright red. And that mainly, Anderson, is because the path we were talking about is in this direction. So they're going to be more with a northerly wind. But if this system shifts off the coast, which we were talking about, that area of red, 9, 10, 11, 12 feet, will encompass all of this area of Tampa and St. Pete. So it's critical. I know this track right now is a bad wind maker, but of course, this could be just as worse with storm surge if we get a shift at the top of the hour. Anderson, we'll keep you updated.
Yeah. Tom, I appreciate that. Richard Rand is with the North Miami Beach Police Department. He joins us now. Thanks so much for being with us, Richard. Just in terms of, I know there's a curfew. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about storm surge. What are your concerns, and what are you seeing in North Miami Beach right now? Is there any problem with crime? What's on your radar right now?
Good evening, Anderson. How are you tonight?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks so much for being with us.
Sure, good. Well, first off, let me start out by saying that the city of North Miami Beach and our municipal partners are going above and beyond to keep the city of North Miami Beach safe for its residents so that we can help them get back on track once we're past this storm. But let me bring you up to speed with what's going on tonight. We're experiencing periods of very heavy winds. We are experiencing periods of heavy rain. We have a lot of power lines down. Some transformers have blown, but we're holding it.
So you've already seen some transformers down. Do you have a sense of how many people may be without power at this point, or has that actually occurred yet?
Yeah, Anderson, the latest update that I have is there's approximately 100,000 people in Dade County without power, and somewhere in the number of about 40 to 45,000 people in Broward County without power.
And just in the hours ahead, in terms of for your officers, are you able to continue to patrol in the hours ahead? Or, I mean, at some point, obviously, in some locales, there's going to be a concern about the winds, and it's just not safe for officers to be out on the streets or anybody.
There is. So our policy is sustained 40-mile-an-hour winds. We don't allow our officers to go out on the roads, but we're the North End EOC, and in between the squalls that we get, we're trying to send our officers out and keep them visible to keep the element that we don't want in the city breaking into homes or businesses, trying to make sure that they know that we're out there protecting our residents.
Yeah, well, Officer Rand, I appreciate that. I'm glad you are and your officers. I wish you the best and stay safe. We're going to take a short break as we continue our coverage of Hurricane Irma and what lies ahead.
To 10 feet. Naples and down south through that little inlet there that pushes in 10 to 15 feet. So that's certainly going to be the highest point. But even as you go further north, places like Tampa could be looking at 5 to 8 feet. So you have to understand what this means in terms of real scale things. Okay, so take, for example, a home. You think about a 1-story or a 2-story home. When we talk about storm surge that's 5 to 10 feet, not only does that cover most human beings that are at least 5 feet tall, but now you're talking at the 10 feet point, you've entirely covered the first story of a building. In some cases on Southwest Florida, we've been talking 15 feet. That starts to creep into the second story of a home. But the other thing you have to keep in mind, too, are the waves that will be mixed in. This is where you start to get really big inundation. And the other thing to note, guys, it's not just the water. It's everything that the water has taken out. So you've not only got very strong currents from those waves that can be knocking things around and adding higher onto those crests, but you've also got the debris that will be in here, not just on the surface, but that can be mixed down lower. So if you're in a car, if you're walking around trying to get places in this storm surge, those things can hit you and you may not even be able to see them. Or you're driving on the roads and something ends up knocking into your car. So this, again, one of the many reasons why you should not be out when this storm surge hits its peak, because it can be incredibly dangerous and deadly. Right, so the latest that we've had is we are continuing to see that turn towards the north. That's going to be your biggest update that we've been seeing. And we expected it to do this. We know that at some point it is going to make that turn to basically almost all northward movement. It's still moving at about 9 miles per hour, though, so it is still relatively slow. But we do expect to see maybe perhaps that increase in the wind speed coming up in the next advisory because the pressure has started to drop. Now, usually the pressure drops first and the wind increase follows shortly thereafter. But now it's getting back out over open water, and that's the fuel that these storms need to allow them to intensify. And as it moves farther away from Cuba, it will get into that really warm water. So we do expect it to get back up to a Category 4 strength as it crosses over the Florida Keys and continues up the west coast. Places like Naples, Fort Myers could still be looking at a Category 4 storm as it skirts along those areas. However, by the time we get to Tampa, we do expect some weakening. And then by the time it ends up making it towards the Georgia-Florida state line. We'll be lucky at that point if it still remains a Category 1 storm. 75 miles per hour is that minimum threshold there from a tropical storm to a Category 1 hurricane. But again, that track does continue to take it in through Florida. We talked about the warm water. We're talking upper 80s for the temperatures in that tiny section between Cuba and towards Florida. And that's where it's going to be entering. That's why we expect it to intensify back up to a Category 4 storm before it edges in towards Florida. Now, some of the main concerns with this storm, first and foremost, are going to be the winds, especially if it really is a Category 4 at landfall. We're talking max wind gusts around 135 in Key West, 134 in Fort Myers, even 132 around Tampa. These numbers coming to us from the National Weather Service. The other impact that's going to be there is going to be rainfall. Widespread across Florida, you're talking 6 to 10 inches of rain, but there will be some heavier pockets mixed in that could see in excess of 15 inches of rain. That won't be widespread, but even still, certainly enough to cause some flooding concerns. Even as the storm pushes farther north into other states, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, these states could also be looking at widespread 4 to 6 inches of rain as that storm continues its slow movement. One of the big things people want to know about is the timing for some of the cities. So let's break that down. Naples is likely to have tropical storm force winds arrive as early as 5 a.m. Sunday morning. Hurricane force winds just a few hours after that. Rainfall total, again, we talk 10 to 12 inches potentially in Naples, and that storm surge, that's going to be key. 10 to 15 feet. That's not only the first story of a building, but that's starting to creep into the second story.
I've seen a few people walk by around here by the river, just tired, they said, of being cooped up for hours, but they quickly head back inside as the rain continues to come down. But again, it's pretty gentle compared to what it is going to be in the next 12, 24 hours. John Berman is standing by in Miami with David Halstead, who we have been hearing from and learning from a lot over the last several days. John, let's go to you.
Thanks so much, Anderson. You talked about the fact it's going to get much worse than it is right now, and it will. The winds will be twice as strong, the rain falling much harder. And we just checked with Florida Light and Power, and already there are 150,000 people without power here in Miami-Dade County and north of here in Broward. 150,000, and it's still going to get much, much worse. So let's talk about what we can expect. I'm joined by David Halstead, former director of the Florida Department of Emergency Management. And David, again, 150,000 people without power, expecting perhaps millions of people without power. How will that be handled?
Yeah, 150,000 already in the storm. That's bad news. That means we're probably going to top into the millions by tomorrow morning. And what that means is that hospitals will be on generators. Those that are at home that perhaps have medical needs, such as need oxygen regeneration that has to be run by electricity, that's going to be a problem. We're going to see the traffic lights down. We're going to see gridlock when people do try to come out and get into the area, which we hope they won't, but we know that there's going to be looky-loos later tomorrow. And so those are going to be the problems. The power going out means people in shelters for longer periods of time.
And again, it's really just beginning. All right, we're told that 6 a.m. is when it will start to get really bad here in Miami, and then that will last for 6 hours or so. So it'll be these 6-hour shifts throughout the state. Talk to me about what happens behind the scenes in emergency management during those 6 hours when things are really bad. What are you all doing?
What's going to happen at the state level is they're going to prepare to come into South Florida somehow. It may mean they have to wait till the second 6-hour shift goes by. We're not sure. Depends how big the swath of the storm is across the state, but we've got to get into the area. As Administrator Fugate talked about and Governor Scott talked about, we don't wait to assess. Certainly we will assess, but we come in first. We look you in the eye, Miami-Dade. We say how bad is bad. We determine that with you, but we've got troops on the ground assisting with search and rescue. The National Guard will be on the ground assisting with law enforcement. We're going to have health and human services folks here helping with disaster medical assistance teams. All those things will be happening, but we've got to wait till the winds die down so the trucks can come in.
It's almost as if on cue, and you and I step out here, the winds start to blow really hard. Look, a lot of people probably starting to think about going to bed here in southern Florida. If you are going to sleep, what should you do before you go to sleep? What should you be concerned about for this night?
Well, certainly you want to make sure that everything is locked up as tight as you can If you've got any protection over the windows and doors, hopefully you've already got that in place. In some cases, there's bracing for your garage doors. You can put that into place and make sure that that's all locked up. Additionally, make sure that you got plenty of water on hand. Again, I understand you may have bottled water, but you can still fill other devices with water and make sure you've got enough in case we lose power throughout the night. And in case, as we talked about, saltwater intrusion on the wells and on the aquifer, what happens if that water becomes contaminated to a certain degree for a period of time? Make sure you've got water on hand. Make sure that your house is battened down. Make sure that you feel as safe as possible within that home that you've decided to stay in.
Yeah, fill that bathtub before you go to sleep tonight. It is great advice. David Halstead, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it. Anderson?
John, we've already had the first hurricane force wind gusts on the Florida Keys, hit the Florida Keys. That happened just a short time ago. But this storm, though, is still 95 miles off of the Keys. And remember, it's moving about 7 to 8 or so miles per hour. Still a long time to come before the Keys start to feel this storm in full force in the morning. Our coverage continues in just a minute.
Home or a business. Tampa, it's going to be a little bit later, but the impacts are still there. We're talking tropical storm force winds arriving in the afternoon, the early afternoon of Sunday. Hurricane force winds arriving by early evening on Sunday. Rainfall about 6 to 8 inches and that storm surge about 5 to 8 feet. Here's a look at the radar. Don't forget, we also have the potential for severe weather. Tornado warnings have been occurring throughout the day today, and we have a tornado watch in effect for much of southern Florida through the day today, and that may even extend into tomorrow and further north as the system continues to push further off to the north. And it's mainly from those outer bands. So here's the look at severe weather threats for today. Damaging winds, but also the potential for isolated tornadoes. And again, this is just for today. This is likely going to push off to the north and into other states as we go into the coming days, and it becomes a bigger threat for places like Georgia, Alabama, as well as South Carolina.
Allison, I'm really struck by the slowness of the storm. Just looking at your timeline there, you know, Naples seeing hurricane force winds in the morning, hurricane force winds not in Tampa, which is a couple of hours away drive. It's about a 2-hour away drive from Fort Myers to Tampa, but they're not seeing hurricane force winds until about 8 o'clock Sunday night. I mean, this thing is moving up the West Coast all day tomorrow.
Yeah, so you just talked about, you said about a 2-hour drive, but you have to keep in mind, you're driving a car 60, 70 miles per hour. This thing's moving only 9 miles per hour. So that's why there's such a huge difference there. It's not very fast. So it takes a long time to get from Naples up towards Tampa. And that's why there's such a big difference there, Anderson.
Let's just get a sense of the latest, Allison.
That's right. So the big shift that we've seen is now we're starting to see that turn to the north and make its way to Florida. In doing that, however, it now means the eye of the storm is back out over open water, and very warm open water at that. That is what's going to allow this storm to re-intensify over the coming hours. The official forecast from the National Hurricane Center does take that trek back up to a Category 4 strength directly over the Florida Keys. Then it continues up the West Coast. We're talking Naples, Fort Myers, then into Tampa, where it will weaken pretty quickly. But again, the big question for a lot of people has been, why is it going to take such a sharp turn to the right? Why not just go back out over the open Gulf? So here's why. The past couple of days, what's been steering the storm is this high pressure right here in the Atlantic. Now, as it edges closer to Florida, it's now going to start to interact with the high pressure just off the coast of Texas. That's essentially blocking it from going too far into the Gulf. Then, as it goes north, it's going to interact with this portion of air, but that's going to retreat, allowing the storm to be able to push pretty far inland, maybe as far as, say, Tennessee, even into Kentucky. So that's going to be the concern. Now, the major concerns going forward are going to be storm surge. We're talking 5 to 10 feet south of Miami through Key West, 10 to 15 feet from Naples down towards Key Largo, even Tampa looking at 5 to 8 feet of storm surge. And then we started to see even some of that creep into portions of Georgia and South Carolina with 4 to 6 feet of storm surge. Winds also going to be a huge factor. Take a look at some of these numbers. For maximum wind gusts, 134 miles per hour in Fort Myers, 135 in Key West. Even Orlando, which is pretty far inland, looking at nearly 75 miles per hour for those peak wind gusts and rainfall, guys. Anderson, this is also going to be the key thing to note. Storm surge is huge, but you also have to keep in mind, as that water comes inland, you also have the water coming down as well. And we could be looking at widespread 6 to 10 inches of rain, and then some heavier pockets that could be 15 plus inches on top of the storm surge that comes in. So again, the main thing, folks, when it starts to come in, don't get out on the roads. Don't get in that water, because the storm surge alone is enough to trap your car, let alone any flash flooding that could incur as well at the same time.
Yeah, so many things to think about depending on where you want to get to. Allison, appreciate it.
That's right. So one of the things that has just changed at the top of the hour is the forward movement, the direction in which the storm is moving. Right now, we're starting to see a change from due west to west-northwest. That may seem very subtle,
continues
but
to rain
that's
here
what we've been
in Fort Myers as we continue to cover Hurricane Irma. Kyung-la is standing by, as she has been all night long for us in Miami Beach. I understand you've been getting some information about some of the first responders who are still out there, particularly the fire department.
Because, Anderson, the wind gusts, the hurricane force gusts have not hit here yet. The fire personnel have not left Miami Beach. They are still responding to calls, and they are extraordinarily busy. They are responding to a number of different alarms, a lot of fire alarms. But the other thing that they're responding to is transformers being blown. They had to actually go into an apartment building and rescue somebody who was stuck in an elevator. So they're continuing to respond. They're continuing to act, but they are warning people that if you had not heeded the mandatory evacuation order here at Miami Beach, at some point when the brunt of the storm arrives tomorrow morning, they will not be able to make those runs, that you are essentially on your own. What we are seeing in place tonight, Anderson, is a curfew. Police and fire say if you are on the streets here in Miami Beach, you are at risk of being arrested. The reason why they put this into place is they do not want anyone on the streets. They are concerned still about flooding. And the other thing, Anderson, is that they don't want people to get back into their cars if they are in Miami and come back to the beach. That, they say, is an extraordinarily bad idea. Even though it looks like the storm is pushing to the west, do not come back here in your cars or get on the streets, Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of being stuck in an elevator with this storm barreling down, what a nightmare. I'm glad they were able to get that person out. Kyung, appreciate all that you have done for us today, and obviously we'll be doing in the days ahead. Let's check in with Miguel Marquez, who is in Punta Gorda, Florida, for us as well. Miguel?
Yeah, we're just north of where you are, and the rain is getting stronger. The wind is picking up. It's still not anywhere near what it's going to get to. If you didn't know that we were just about to get deluged with water and rain in the next 24 hours, you would think it was just a nice summer shower. Punta Gorda is very, very sensitive to hurricanes. Charlie came through here 13 years ago and nearly leveled this town. The track that Irma is on is eerily similar to that Charlie was on 13 years ago, so they are watching it closely. Right now, it takes it just to the west of Punta Gorda, which would put it on that dirty side of the eye wall if it goes where it's currently on track to go. The shelter situation here in the county, Charlotte County, they're closed. There's no more room at the shelters in the county. They only have 3 here. It's a fairly small county, and much of it is in lowlands, so there aren't, when they expect a 10 to 15 foot tidal surge, they don't have a lot of space basically to put shelters in, so they've borrowed space from the county north of here, Sarasota County, and they're telling people to go there if they need shelter. There are still 4 of those 5 shelters that are taking people in. If one runs out of gas, if one is elderly, if one is disabled and one cannot get to a shelter, and you can only get to one here in Sarasota, in Charlotte County, they will take you in. But right now they're trying to get everybody, the bulk of people, north to Sarasota County. The big concern here is not only the wind and the rain, but that storm surge. They believe 10 to 15 feet would go into the county and then pull everything back out to sea in pretty quick order. Anderson?
Yeah, Miguel, be careful in the hours ahead. That's about it for our coverage tonight, but CNN's coverage obviously continues on throughout the nighttime hours. There's so much to tell you about. We are following this minute by minute. We are expecting a new update on the track of the storm at the top of the hour at 11 p.m. We're going to take a short break.
Shift in which it is going to start to make that northward trek towards the state of Florida. And we're starting to at least get a little bit of a glimpse of that. Again, it's not a sharp turn, at least as of this point, but we're starting to see that change over. Now, one of the main concerns with this storm is still going to be incredibly strong winds. At landfall point, for a lot of these areas, these are your maximum wind gusts you're going to be dealing with. 138 miles per hour in Key West, 136 in Fort Myers. Even Tampa going to be looking at 116 miles per hour at its strongest point for the storm. The track still does take it along the west coast, but it's likely going to make its first landfall, if you will, in the U.S. over the Florida Keys. Exactly where, that is still yet to be determined. We have to wait to find out how quickly the storm makes that sharp turn to the north to really be able to tell exactly where the storm is going to go. It's then likely to go along places like Naples, Fort Myers, into Tampa, and then eventually it will move all inland and then push towards the states like Georgia, Alabama, and into Tennessee. One of the key things that we expect for this storm is that it will re-intensify back to a Category 4 storm. The main reason for that, take a look at how warm the water is in this region, upper 80s. That is the perfect fuel for a storm like this to be able to intensify, and that's what we expect it to do before it finally makes landfall. Now, we've been hearing a lot of this. People want to know, what is the timing for a lot of these cities in Florida? So let's take a look at Tampa, for example. Tropical storm winds will have already arrived in some of these areas by tomorrow afternoon. Hurricane force winds will likely already be in Tampa by tomorrow evening. Rainfall could be looking at 6 to 8 inches of rain, and the storm surge around 5 to 8 feet. Now we move to Naples, a little bit farther south of Tampa. Tropical storm winds will arrive early tomorrow morning. Hurricane force winds could arrive, say, just shortly after sunrise on Sunday. Then we talk about rainfall. This is where we could be looking at really heavy amounts of rain. We're talking nearing a foot of rain, and some of the areas just outside of Naples could pick up, say, as much as 15 inches of rain. Storm surge is also going to be a big factor, 10 to 15 feet for this region. Here's a look at the radar going forward to show you not just the direction, but also where those heavy rain bands are going to be. Again, on Sunday, we expect it early morning to cross over the Keys, then continue its trek up the west coast. We're talking Naples, Fort Myers, into Tampa, then pushing up towards Jacksonville and into the state of Georgia. It's still going to take incredibly strong winds into places like South Carolina and Georgia, which is why those states also have tropical storm watches. Even though we expect the storm to actually weaken a bit before it makes it into those areas, it's not going to weaken entirely. They are still going to get some impacts. Miami is already starting to see some of those impacts as we speak, and hurricane force winds, guys, will be arriving as early as tomorrow morning.
Key West. This is one of few that we've had today. There will be many. In fact, it's not unusual to have 50, 60, 70, 75, 80 tornado warnings. I know Harvey had over 200. But again, tornadoes are going to be an issue. And I know for many, when they're looking at, of course, Irma making its way toward southwestern Florida, Miami, Hollywood, Boca, Delray Beach may think, okay, we're not going to see the strongest winds, but you're in an area where you could have a higher concentration of tornadoes. Now, again, as we continue to watch this, Anderson, make its way off the coast, I'm going to show you a radar in a minute. Very interesting now to continue to watch the eye. We're already seeing on the infrared satellite imagery more purple. That's the higher cloud tops, colder cloud tops. So it's starting to generate some energy. But I think we may be going through one of those eye wall replacement cycles. More than when almost the entire state of Florida under a hurricane warning. Watches to the north will change in due time as the storm progresses northward. We've talked tirelessly about the storm surge, of course, getting quite great. Now, you have to understand where you see the area of purple of 10 to 15 feet. Initially, that's wetlands. That's Everglades. There's barely any roads there until you get up to around Alligator Alley. But it's all the way through the Carolinas, and that will continue to be the case. Now, here's the eye. We've got a secondary banding in yellow that is starting to occur. We typically see that when that outer band starts to form, and then it shrinks in toward the center, and it gains strength. It's a little close to the shoreline right now.
welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Michael Holmes, coming to you live from Orlando, Florida, as Hurricane Irma barrels towards this state.
And I'm Isa Suarez, coming to you live from Miami, where it is 11 o'clock on the East Coast. I want to get you the very latest on Hurricane Irma and its new path. Let's go to Tom Sater. Tom, what is the very latest? Where is Hurricane Irma right now?
Well, it's taking its time, Issa, getting off the coast of Cuba, and there has been major interaction. The only thing we can tell you as far as an update is it's slowing down at 6 miles per hour now. And, of course, that means a lot because it continues now, which was northwesterly, more northwest, but it still has that northwesterly component, which means it's not due north. We thought by now this would have occurred so we can pinpoint better for everyone a landfall. Everybody just wants to know where landfall is going to be and what time. Cannot do that just yet, so we're going to rely on the model still in the National Hurricane Center. Wind still at 120, but it's been undergoing an eye wall replacement cycle, which it's done many times in the last several days, but it's slowing down. Notice on this picture here, you're going to see a little wobble at the very couple ends of the frames of the animation. That the eye wall replacement cycle. Last year when Hurricane Matthew made its way up the coast, it did the same thing in the Freeport, Bahamas. And every time you go through one of these, you have a new center of the eye and you need to replot the track. Let's take a look at the track. So this is just coming out now. I'm looking at it for the first time as well. All right, we have seen a little bit of a shift now to the west. Not by much, but I do believe we had more of a movement like this. So again, there's still a cone of uncertainty, but it takes it directly over Tampa now, which isn't far off that track. If we go further to the north, it still keeps Atlanta in the same position, but drops it down a little bit more toward the south. Again, this is new to us. We're going to continue to monitor it, but it's still a good 90 miles per hour as you get into Monday morning. So again, what we're seeing here, and we're going to continue to monitor. We'll kind of do a little research and study it a little bit more for the next half hour, but not a big change. One change they have done is they've extended now parts of the storm surge watch, and you can see the amounts. What we're seeing in Key West is critical. And again, we had a wind gust earlier at hurricane strength. That's 74 miles per hour. First gust at hurricane strength. But we are going to watch, of course, the storm surge. One, I show you the winds here. And again, you can see they're common, but we're getting some pretty good wind. Wind gusts at 38 at West Palm. I mean, that's enough to down some. Even power lines, 35 gust, and in Miami, then you're getting 56 now in Marathon, and there's 66 in Key West. So it's going to ebb and flow when it comes to the winds. But I want to break this down for you. When we take a look at the bright white, this is more of where our eye is coming in. Moving into Key West overnight by dawn tomorrow. We still expect it to make its way, and these models will change somewhat in the next couple hours, at 3 p.m. moving into. So it takes its time. Even toward Tampa, we're looking at about maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and you can still see the circulation. Concerns are going to be on the East Coast of still storm surge coming around these large feeder bands coming in. Little concerned about Jacksonville because some of the rainfall totals want to pick up in this area. And we know with Matthew last year, they had significant flooding in St. John's. Now, as we take a look at the extended winds northward, we're going to have some downed trees. I mean, we could see tens of downed trees. And again, it's going to be significant in the southeastern U.S. up into Georgia and parts of Alabama, North Carolina, because it's hardy pine. It's pine country, and they have very weak root systems, and there's going to be many of them knocking out power to neighborhoods and, of course, blocking trees. When you look at these wind gusts and what the extent could be, these are the peak. I've got to tell you now, and it's kind of hard, Michael and Issa, to talk about this, but once you start to receive hurricane force winds, whether it's a gust or a wind, and I know this sounds frightening, but we know from past experiences, you want to get in the interior part of your house, obviously like a tornado watch or warning. You want to stay away from windows. But they say once you start getting these winds, make sure your shoes are on, sleep with them on if you have to. If you have a motorcycle helmet, a bicycle helmet, anything like that, go ahead and put it on. And if you have children, then do that as well. Also, fill up bathtubs if you can, any kind of sink, any buckets. You're going to need the water if you lose power. If you have a propane tank, you don't want to leave it outside, put it in the garage. You don't want it in the interior part of your house if you want any kind of leak. But also, and this is hard, but we saw this too with Harvey, get an axe or make sure you have a chainsaw, even a hammer, what you can to take it up. the attic if you need to escape the waters and get to the roof. Many people get to their attic and they don't know how to break through. Those are hard things to think about, but it needs to be done. Again, with the winds like now, and if we take a look at the radar, a slow movement, only a few miles per hour, I mean, under from what it was just in the last hourly update. And we're going to continue to have these updates every hour now. National Hurricane Center is putting these out every hour. Tornado watch, we had a few of them. But again, moving now northwest instead of west-northwest. That's the beginning of that turn northward. But until that, we're really not going to have a good idea of exactly where landfall will be. That's why the National Hurricane Center has got the track for us with the cone of uncertainty, the storm surge, and, of course, the amounts of rain we'll continue to monitor for you. Isa, again, this is beginning. We had our first gust, and that means everything right now. The next couple of days, it's full press ahead for everybody.
And Tom, great advice you're giving to all our viewers. But let me ask you this. I mean, one person was saying to me, why is it taking so long? People are still feeling the jitters, want this to get this over and done with. Explain to our viewers why it's taking so long for Hurricane Irma to finally make landfall.
Well, I think part of the problem was, why have we been seeing this westerly shift? High pressure in the Bermuda right now has really been a kind of a stronghold. We thought for sure that at some point that area high pressure that's in the Atlantic would break down or it would slide eastward. So our westerly movement wasn't such a big deal and maybe we would see it move north. But in the northeastern U.S., a trough was coming down, but it didn't turn out to be very strong. So it's not lifting it up northward like we would expect it. But again, we've said this all week. Until that turn to the north happens, we won't know exactly where landfall is. So it's, again, every hurricane has its different characteristics and its different path. This one's just unfolding our eyes, not exactly the way we would like it. There is no best case scenario here. Isa.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom Sater will touch base with you throughout the hour for all the latest updates. Thanks very much, Tom. And Michael, as Tom was saying, you know, we've got the shift now going slightly northwest. And for people here in Miami, you know, what we've heard from the governor of Florida is don't be confused. Just because it's shifted somewhat, don't go back to your homes. Wait for authority to tell you when you've been given the all clear. So very, very important for people to remain in those shelters until they've been given the green light, Michael.
Yeah, and indeed. And of course, the storm being so big, I mean, as the state of Florida, wherever you are in the state, you are going to be impacted. Isa, thanks so much. We'll check in with you a little bit later. And we saw, as Tom was indicating there, that track headed towards the north of the state, heading up Tampa, Florida, and we have the mayor of Tampa, Bob Buckhorn, on the line joining us. You're pretty much in the line of sight of Irma. You know, what preparations have been taken to make people as ready as they can be and the city ready? Mayor Buckhorn, you can hear me. Oh, we seem to have lost Bob Buckhorn there, unfortunately. We're going to try to get him back, though. Tampa, very much, Isa Suarez, in the line of... And one of the things that is worrying meteorologists is if the eye of the storm stays off the coast side of the peninsula there, the storm surge is going to be that much worse. And Tampa is a city that is very susceptible to a storm surge. So we'll try to get the mayor back in a little while. Isa? Oh, I think... Now,
what we've been seeing on
that. Bob Buckhorn, we've got you back on the line now, I'm told. Got the communications set. You are in the line of this storm. What is your big concern? What preparations have you made?
We do this all year round. We recognize that living in Florida, that this is always a risk. You know, we've been lucky because we haven't taken a direct hit in over 90 years. So we really have been blessed. But we also recognize that our day was going to come, and it looks like our day has come. Fortunately, we've got a whole city that has trained for this. Now we're in the execution phase, and we got a lot of people that are counting on us to get up and do our jobs tomorrow.
Yeah, there's been a lot of sort of but also reporting that Tampa in particular is vulnerable to this sort of storm, to a hurricane and to the storm surge. So many houses close to water, of course, and the proximity to the lower levels. What about the storm surge? That must be your big concern.
It is indeed. It is the issue that we worry about the most. It is what we fear the most. I mean, we're going to get through the wind, through the rain, depending on what this level of surge is. But more importantly, the surge will occur tomorrow at the same time we have a high tide. So that sounds the problem. So for our low-lying areas, which happen to be very close to downtown, those areas that tend to hold a lot of water in rainstorms anyway because they are low-lying, my house, for example, we've evacuated. I am in zone level A. Those are the areas that I fear for the most and potentially would experience that surge moving in early in the morning.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. I mean, everybody hopes that, Irma is a little bit kinder to Tampa than other places because of that vulnerability. Tell us, what is the worst case scenario? What if the storm does the worst thing and you do get that surge? How big will it be? How much of the city could be impacted?
Well, certainly all of downtown would be impacted. All of the areas along the waterfront, which tend to be our more affluent areas, would be impacted. It would be pretty devastating. There would be a lot of trees down. There would be a lot of standing water. There would be power disruptions. It would take a number of days to get the power hooked up, if not weeks. So I see Tampa in a predicament, not that we wouldn't emerge from it, but it would be a tough couple of weeks, I think.
Tell us about shelters, preparations. Are the shelters full? Are there enough shelters? Have people been going there?
Well, they have been going there for sure. And obviously with a storm of this magnitude, there are never enough shelters. This storm, as you know, took a jog to the west only 2 or 3 days ago. We had anticipated going to help our friends in Miami, not being the recipient of these hurricane force winds. So there were a lot of people, I would suspect, that didn't think this storm was going to hit them, that thought Tampa was safe, that this was going to be a challenge for the East Coast. And so their preparations were probably delayed. The shelters are filling up. They're filling up quickly. There is still some availability. I would imagine some point tomorrow that will end as well. But here's what people need to know. You don't have to travel necessarily to a shelter. You don't have to travel to Georgia. All you have to do is get out of flood zone A. Just that B, C, and E, it could be a few blocks away. It could be a few miles away. All you need to do is get to higher ground, get to a safe place, stay with a friend. It's not necessary that you completely pack up and move somewhere else.
Yeah, well, our thoughts and prayers are with you there in Tampa. As you say, it wasn't expected to be this much of a threat to your city, and hopefully it won't be as bad as it could be. Mayor Bob Buckhorn, thanks so much for being with us. And Issa, that vulnerability for the city of Tampa, which is a large city, of course, here in Florida, worry. For years now, they've been saying that Tampa could be vulnerable to this kind of storm. Yeah. So this is really a worst-case scenario for them.
Absolutely. I mean, there are 385 shelters along the new path of the hurricane has taken, and it seems from what officials have been telling us that many of the people route, Michael, that had already taken precautions before we saw a shift slightly west. So, I mean, that is one positive sign, at least, that people are heeding those warnings. Let's get the very latest from our Derek Van Dam. And Derek, you know, the winds have started to pick up here in Miami. Nothing like we have seen in the last 48 hours or so. And the rain comes and goes. It changes so quickly. It's really hard to keep on top of it, and it's very deceptive, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Issa. I would believe that the next 10 to 15 minutes, weather is really going to intensify here and where you are located, because we have one of the outer rain bands coming in. Again, just checking on the local radar. I am in Miami Beach. We're about 1 block away from the water in a safe location, about 4 stories high. We have seen an incredible amount of wind over the past few hours. We've seen transformers blowing in the distance. Obviously, trees or tree limbs coming down and falling on some of the electrical wires. We had flickering of our own electricity here. Fortunately, we have generators. There was a mandatory evacuation in place for this particular location and a mandatory curfew. So anyone who decided to stay, obviously against their better judgment, they are actually prone to being arrested. So if you're found on the streets tonight, you could potentially be arrested by police. Obviously, the roads are completely desolate. It looks like a ghost town right now. I managed to speak to the mayor of Miami Beach, Philip Levine, earlier today, and he told me that fire and police officials are still on high alert regardless of that westerly track in Irma's path. That doesn't mean that Miami-Dade County is out of the clear, so do not let your guard down. In fact, we expect the worst of the conditions to really occur by first light tomorrow morning, so roughly about 6 a.m. By the way, already 109,000 people without electricity in Miami-Dade alone. In the entire state of Florida, 160,000 people without electricity. There have been rescue attempts from an individual who was stuck in an elevator. Police personnel have still been responding to phone calls and service requests, lots of them being tripped fire alarms across some of the buildings here. But as soon as the winds become sustained at 40 miles or higher, Issa, they're going to start plucking those personnels from the road, and anyone who stayed here is on their own. Issa?
Yeah, and that curfew has been set in place from 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. for a reason. It's for your safety. That's what officials are saying. So it's important you abide by those warnings and heed those warnings. Derek Van Dam, thank you. I'm going to toss back now to Michael Holmes. Michael.
Issa Suarez there in Miami. Thanks so much. We'll check in with you shortly. Meanwhile, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, more on our breaking news coverage of Hurricane Irma as the storm's path
now, but I think that's
to the west and the north.
We've talked tirelessly about as well. We've got 90 miles here from Cuba to the coast of Florida to develop. This is going to be more than 90 miles. You have to consider the curvature and its western track and then to the north. So instead of 90 miles of extremely warm water, we've got 120, 125 miles. So that will intensify with this water temperatures being at 85 or 90. Tornado watch now for the extreme southern half of Florida. We're going to talk more in depth about that as time progresses and what to expect past Florida. There are millions of people up in Georgia, South Carolina, out in Tennessee that've got an interesting forecast, too, and we'll share that with them, Anderson, in just a little bit.
Tom.
Yeah, John, we continue to watch the storm center now, making its way away from the coast of Cuba. We knew it would make its way here, and all along since actually last weekend, we were saying until the storm reaches Cuba and turns northward, we just do not know for sure where landfall will be. The computer models, we pushed into them and rely on them, and they have been fluctuating earlier this week to the east and now more of a push to the west. And we're going to continue to watch that because the steering currents mean everything, but this is such a monster storm, it really doesn't mean anybody's going to miss out on this. Watching in the development, the pressure is dropping. Most likely we're going to see an increase in the winds because it takes a while for the winds to catch up to that pressure drop. In fact, 125 miles per hour, I wouldn't be surprised to see it up to 130. That'll kick it back up to Category 4 status, and we could even see it grow a little bit more. We've got a lot of land, our water to work with. It's not just miles. If you talk about the curvature over toward Fort Myers, that's about 125 miles. So it's got time, it's got fuel, and it still has its spin and intensity. We had a few models that wanted to drape it down into the higher terrain of Cuba. That would have tore the system down a little bit. But really, for the models to be even in central Cuba or staying off, it's been running pretty much mediocre right through these models. We have a tornado watch now for the entire southern half of Florida. That will continue to move northward in time. As the storm approaches, we've had a few warnings. We've got a warning right now in Key West for a tornado. So that means it's either Doppler indicated or visually indicated. So again, on the ground, as the bands continue to move in, the wind gusts will increase. There will be times of a complete downpour activity and then a couple of quiet times. But we are going to see a gentle increase in the winds. The forecast, which shows the spin and the rainfall, bright red are your heavy downpours. And again, our storm surge is going to be significant, mainly first in the Everglades. Of course, Miami, we're watching them closely, but the real significant increase of the storm surge in the Everglades. And that's good news. It's wetlands. They can have that. But as it continues to march northward, we'll see more of a tornado outbreak possibility on the East Coast. We'll have the surge, of course, continuing up the East Coast. On the West Coast, winds will be out of the north somewhat, northeasterly. They will wrap around. I think Tampa is going to have a problem. Not so much, of course, well, yes, when the storm moves through. Your guard down in Tampa Bay, because most likely on the back edge of this, we're going to find winds coming in from the northwest and due west. So that'll shove the, of course, storm surge and those walls of water back into Tampa Bay, which could be just as bad, if not worse. I want to go a little bit further out, though, and talk about those in Georgia, South Carolina, into Alabama and Tennessee. As you see, the track has been watching this. Let me show you what some of the models look like, of course, after we talk about the winds, because I want everybody to know, if you haven't been in the southeast, you see the core of the winds move up through, hugging that west coast, moving northward. What you see in purple here are wind gusts in excess of 60, maybe even 70 miles per hour. This area of the southeastern U.S. is pine country, which means hardy pine. Weak root systems, but very high. I mean, they're massive. They fall in isolated thunderstorms, knock out power, damage trees. We could easily see tens and tens of thousands of trees destroyed through Florida and through the southeast. But now, John, watch what happens to these models. They move up with the force of wind. We carry it into northern Alabama. I'll show it to you later.
Category
it starts
5
to become a
has
bird.
weakened a little to a Category 3, but it is expected to strengthen once again as it moves into open water between Florida and Cuba. That water is warm, and that feeds a storm like Irma. It is so large that it's already whipping the Florida Keys with hurricane-force winds and pounding surf. The track shifting west during the day, and that's it. Along Florida's Gulf Coast, racing to emergency shelters. Officials warning that Irma is likely to bring potentially lethal flooding along the coast and widespread power outages. Isa.
Thanks very much, Michael. And like you said, it's not just shifting west, as we heard the last 20 minutes from Tom Sater, shifting northwest. And for many people, that shift that we've seen in the last 6 hours or so has caught many people by surprise. Now, the city of Naples is in the eye of the storm. That's where we find our Ed Lavandera. Ed, from what you've seen on the ground, have people been heeding those warnings? Have people been able to seek shelter?
Yeah, from what we have seen today, and we've been here since early this morning in the city of Naples, I've had a chance to talk with the mayor of the city, who says he believes that many people heeded the warnings to evacuate actually several days ago and started leaving the area even when Hurricane Irma was just threatening all of South Florida. What its exact location and ending location wasn't quite known, and many people heeding those warnings then and taking off. So that is a good sign. As we drove around throughout the city today, essentially, just as the mayor has described it, as a ghost town. There are still a number of people who have chosen to stay behind. In fact, we also traveled about a 30-minute drive south of here to Marco Island, a very popular tourist destination where about 16,000 people live full-time. We spoke with the police chief there this evening. He believes that most of people that were on the island have evacuated as well, but that there's still are a number of people on the island who chose to stay back. A lot of high-rise condominiums and that sort of thing on that particular island. So as you can see here this evening, just a slight drizzle at times. Occasionally the rain picks up a little bit. We're still not really feeling the effects of what is on its way to this part of southwest Florida, so all eyes on that. But the emergency officials we've spoken with say they are ready for this landfall and ready to answer any calls for help and distress after the storm passes. But they feel that they have done everything that they could have done to get people into safe places before this storm makes landfall. Isa?
And Ed, I know you said you spoke to the mayor. What was the mayor's biggest concern?
It's the storm surge. This is an area that is expecting anywhere between 10 to 15 feet of storm surge. There is a mandatory evacuation throughout all of Naples and throughout the county here, where there's some 300,000 people that live in these areas, those coastal areas along the western edges of the county and the city. The areas that are going to be of great concern here as that storm surge pushes inland. The exact extent of that damage and how much of that flooding will reach, we don't exactly know, but everyone here preparing for anywhere between 10 and 15 foot of storm surge. And talking to the mayor who was here during Hurricane Wilma back in 2005, and when I asked him, what are the areas of town that concern you the most? They say it's really kind of hard for us to pinpoint exactly what is concern. We've never dealt with this kind of storm surge.
Thanks very much for that. Ed Lavandera joining us from the city of Naples. And Michael, that really helps put in perspective. They're expecting between 10 to 15 feet when it comes to the storm surge. That is a staggering amount.
It is hard to imagine, isn't it, what that might look like on the ground. Issa, thanks a lot. We'll check in with you in a minute. Bill Barnett is actually the mayor of Naples, Florida. He's joining us now on the phone. 10 to 15 feet of storm surge. I mean, you must be extremely concerned about your city.
Yes, Michael, I am. And as you said a minute ago, it is very, very hard to imagine. And I'm hoping that the forecast is wrong.
Well, what about preparations? What can you do? I mean, there's nothing you can do about a storm surge if it's as bad as they predict it could be. But what preparations have you made? Obviously, human life is the priority. What is happening there?
Well, as was said, people started evacuating here very early in the week. They took this storm very seriously, just a threat, and I think that Harvey had something to do with that, with the awareness and a realization that this could happen to us. I had said that with Wilma, there was a very, very cavalier attitude. People were on the beach the day that Wilma was coming. They kind of didn't believe it was going to happen, and I have just seen, and here we are years later, but this has been taken seriously. Our emergency first responders, police, fire are ready. We have made plans both for prior to the storm and during storm. Of course, there won't be any emergency services once the winds attain tropical force, and of course, after the aftermath, which nobody really knows what's going to be right now. But we do have a plan.
Yeah. Yeah, and something else you can't imagine what it might look like afterwards. You make a really good point, Mr. Mayor, about complacency that has happened in the past when the hurricane has not done up to expectations, and then next time around people get a bit lazy about acting on their own safety. That's not the case here. A lot of people, I think some 6.5 million Floridians in a state of 20 million have been under evacuation orders. You say a lot of people in your area, in Naples, have heeded that. Everywhere else, though, there are those who are saying they're going to ride it out, they're going to stay put. What is your message to them, particularly, as you say, first responders, during the height of the storm? They're not coming.
Well, it has been said time and time again. I've said it, others have said it, that you're just not going to get a response. And, there are diehards out there that just absolutely want to ride it out. So, hopefully they stay in a secure place, an interior room, and whether we've done everything that we possibly can.
Mayor Bill Barnett from Naples, Florida, thank you so much for your time. Good luck with the storm on its way. We do appreciate it. All right, coming up here on the program, our breaking news coverage of Hurricane Irma continues. We will talk to the National Hurricane Center about how strong this monster storm is and where it is right now and where it might be headed. That's coming up.
Like we had with Harvey, which means there may be a loss of steering currents when central Tennessee to northern Alabama, and that means heavy, heavy rainfall. We'll break that down for you more, of course, in the coming hours. But again, it's just beginning. We've got a multi-day event heading our direction. John.
Tom Sater listening to every word of your forecast. 20 million people in Florida alone. And then you start to talk about Alabama and Georgia. Millions more will be affected by this storm as these days continue. Millions already affected. So many hurt, so much damage through the Caribbean. That is why we're watching this so closely.
Is in the Weather Center. Allison, let's bring us up to date.
Right, Anderson. So we take a look at what we've got for right now. Again, you've got some imagery here where we can see the latest on Irma. One's right now 125 miles per hour, gusting up to 155 miles per hour. The movement, it's been what we call wild. Okay, where it's going back and forth between west and north and west and north. The question is, when does it finally start to make that really sharp turn to the north? We focus on the maximum wind gusts. Notice for the most part, it's the western half of Florida where we have our strongest winds. Key West, this will be our peak maximum wind gust around 138 miles per hour. But say up around Fort Myers, 136, even Tampa going to be in the triple digits, right around 116 miles per hour. The track itself will still take it over portions.
Tom?
Well, you were just talking, Anderson, about what it's going to look like when it gets to. So I thought I'd go right in to show the 21 models that make up the U.S. model, the GFS. Once it makes its way through southern Georgia and moving into northern Alabama, I want to let everybody make sure that they know this. If they don't know the country well enough, they're watching on the West Coast and never been to the Southeast, this area is pine country, hardy pine. Really tall, massive trees that have extremely weak root systems. And you get heavy rain on those roots, and you get a stiff wind. We're going to have tens of thousands of trees down. So power outages will not just be across the Florida Peninsula. They're going to make their way up toward Atlanta and the surrounding areas, Alabama, Birmingham as well, maybe into south central Tennessee with winds around 50 or even stronger gusts. But look what happens afterwards. What does this remind you of? Kind of like Harvey after it went into Texas. And that was the problem. We lost the steering currents. However, there's a big difference with this one. It's not going to flood out like Texas did in parts of Louisiana, because by the time it gets here, it's going to be pretty much dried out. It doesn't have the water source. Now, what we're watching is still a drop. Well, we were at 120. So now that we're getting up to 125, which means this eye wall replacement cycle is taking place. We'll probably see the pressure drop a little bit more. It will become a Category 4 when it's up just a little bit more. But we're still looking at this westerly component, which has us a little concerned. I mean, there's no best scenario here. I mean, we're going to with this, but as long as it continues to head west and not north, it's going to be harder and harder to pinpoint where landfall will be. So again, we lean on the models. We look at the difference of hurricanes. Now, I want to remember, you've all seen this picture. Hurricane Andrew 25 years ago. Notice you could fit 2 Andrews inside Irma. This is what we call an annual hurricane. They're small, compact. The eye is tighter. The wind radius of damage that went across Homestead, Florida, wasn't that kind of damage 20, 30 miles out. When you look at the track, and take a look at this, this went down to a Category 5, but it was a year later. When it first made landfall and devastated the southern portion of the Florida Peninsula, it went in the record books as a 4. It took almost a year of research and looking at the wind damage to actually put it in the record books as a 5. My point is this. There's not a big difference.
Hello and welcome
I mean,
to
a
our
4
viewers
is massive.
all around
5
the
as
world.
well.
I'm Michael
You're not
Holmes
gonna be
coming
able
to you
tell
live
that
in
much.
Orlando, Florida. Isa Suarez is in Miami. Isa, I got to tell you, here in Orlando, the wind is picking up a little. It's very dry. It's not even raining. 24 hours from now, the storm to be having a big impact here. Tell us about Miami.
Yeah, it's so deceptive, isn't it? This weather, you know, we've started to see it spitter somewhat. It's only just now starting to feel the rain, but the wind, I've just felt the wind picking up quite substantially, and also howling. We can already hear that sound from the wind. Let's find out how the storm is moving. We know it's shifted somewhat northwest. Tom Sater is keeping a very close eye on Hurricane Irma. And Tom, what is the very latest?
Okay, Isa, we've been able to kind of take a step back and look at the latest advisory, because it happened all of the watch it together when the graphics came up, and it's about what I expected. There was now a western shift in that track, but let's break it down, because this is critical for a lot of folks here, and a couple of miles here and there means everything. First of all, with the infrared imagery, what you want to see or not is the brighter colors, those higher, colder cloud tops, and when you start to see more of a symmetrical look after it was interacting with the land in Cuba, we're starting to see some strength, although we're still at 120 miles per hour. But now that the eye is going through an eye wall replacement cycle, it's going to most likely start to increase in strength somewhat. Now, it's a Category 3. The National Hurricane Center now wants to keep it as the 3. Here in the CNN World Weather Center, we're not so sure on that because not only do you not have just 90 miles, all right, between in the straits from Cuba to Florida, you've got really now a distance that should take this now on a farther track up toward Sarasota. This is going to be a lot like last year when Hurricane Matthew hugged the coast on the East Coast. When it came through Freeport, there was a little wobble when it underwent one of these eyewall replacement cycles, and it just stayed off the coast by about 30 miles. When it's on the coast, it's damage, but because it stayed off last year, Matthew was light to moderate, but it did a lot of damage on A1A, flooding up and down the coast, even at Jacksonville. They'll see that again with this one, even though it's on the other coast. And then we had this historic flooding in the Carolinas that killed about 24. Let's break this down. No longer is it west-northwest. It's northwest. So, again, it still has that component to move more to the west. I still believe, break this down and we take a look at the new track. This is what we're thinking right now. Instead of the 90 miles as mentioned, the system's going to travel about 280. So it moves from the center, moves probably pretty close to Naples, and somewhere in between Fort Myers and Tampa. We're looking at a landfall, but it's hard to predict the landfall because like Matthew last year, skirting the coast, it only takes a wobble here or there to give us a landfall. It could be now that we're seeing a shift in the Tampa area of about 15 to 20 miles, which actually is the worst news for Tampa because it puts you in the I band of the winds. It'll give you the surge up into the bay, most likely. Even if it's to the north, we're going to be looking at return flow. So, again, that's the concern. Consensus is generally maybe around Sarasota, Florida, possible landfall, Bradenton, all right, that's County. Anna Marie Island's going to be smacked with this as well. And it's still, as I mentioned, I noticed this a little bit of a shift from Atlanta, which may keep them out of some of the strongest winds, but they're still in the worst quadrant. But by that time, we'll start to see the storm lose some strength. After that, when it moves up toward Tennessee, the models look like Harvey, just meandering all over the place, not having a steering current, and that was kind of frightening, thinking, okay, here we go with something that's going to hang around for a while and drop copious amounts of rain. But by then, we think it's going to be dried up, and it's not going to have the amount of rainfall that Harvey had. It doesn't have that water source, so maybe 2 to 4 inches. But we've got to get back and take a look at this